Chapter 350. The Qing National Treasury Transport Company was the most famous independent kingdom within its borders. Although the officials were all sent from Jingdo, because they were far away in Jiangnan and there were too many temptations within, no matter what rank an official came from outside, in the end, they would all be assimilated by this enormous and alluring golden nest. Perhaps the officials of the Overwatch Council were better, but the officials within the transport company had long become one of the pillars of this independent kingdom. No one wanted any change to happen to the palace treasury. Even though the emperor had given an edict for the palace treasury to be transferred from the eldest princess of Xinyang to Commissioner Fan, although these palace treasury officials had been the eldest princess' trusted aides for over a dozen years, they were not afraid of Fan Xian's arrival. They thought that as long as they did their superficial work well, presumably Sir Fan Jr. would not touch the foundation of the palace treasury. The trick of changing the emperor and changing the court officials would not play out. What was the foundation of the palace treasury? It was not the mountains of gold and silver, not the laboring workers, not the merchants on the outside, but the high-level craftsmen and treasurers of the three large workshops. The three large workshops of the palace treasury were spread across the various provinces of Jiangnan. The first workshop was responsible for producing glass products, handicrafts that required high precision, porcelain goods, extremely expensive perfume, famous spirits that had been steamed over and over again, and many more. Things like glass products could be expanded into countless products. In short, they could be called luxury goods producers. The second workshop was responsible for producing large amounts of cotton cloth, gauze, researching rice seeds, forging good steel, and major production. The combination of the first and second industries was mainly producing daily necessities. The third workshop was the most heavily guarded of the three workshops. It was responsible for producing ships and advanced military equipment that the military needed. For example, the lightweight repeating crossbows that the Black Knights were currently equipped with were provided by this workshop. Further away, the Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the Research Department of the Palace Treasury were still endlessly developing gunpowder. However, ever since the Yi family had opened the workshop, the development of gunpowder seemed to have gone down a wrong path. At present, the Overwatch Council could only use a cart of gunpowder as cannon and had not invented firearms. No one knew if it was because the people of the Qing kingdom were not smart enough or if that Yi woman had done something bad in the past. The three large workshops were just a rough description. There were countless related products scattered densely across North Min, producing goods endlessly. Then, they were picked up by private merchants and distributed to northern Qi, Dongyi, small vassal states, and wild kingdoms beyond the ocean. They greedily and violently seized the money and food of the entire world. At the same time, they spread a better quality of life and more luxurious enjoyment to the entire world. After the Yi family was taken into the palace treasury, although the various industries were greatly impacted, their legacy remained. Furthermore, the various levels of treasurers had brought out a great deal of wisdom to bring the Yi family's industries to greater heights. This curve reached its peak 17 years ago. Of the entire Qing kingdom's financial income, 40% came from the palace treasury. It was only in recent years that this number had declined slightly. However, it was still the Qing kingdom's largest source of financial income. To borrow a common phrase from a certain world, the palace treasury was the engine of desire that pushed the Qing kingdom forward. It was precisely because the treasurers, an unranked official, had a very important effect on the palace treasury's production. Additionally, the eldest princess herself was a woman who traveled the world by scheming. She was not good at using a mountain-splitting knife to carry out management. Thus, over the years, all kinds of situations had overlapped and made the treasurers the most special group of officials in the Qing kingdom. The lowest level of workers in the palace treasury did not earn much money. Even the officials responsible for management were not very arrogant. Only the treasurers, other than a generous salary, enjoyed all kinds of allowances and various bonuses. It had to be said that this was the result of the eldest princess raising wolves with high salaries. It also had to do with the chaotic management of the court these years. In the Palace Treasury Transport Company, the treasurers were truly like local tyrants. Although they did not appear arrogant on the surface, they secretly took money, exploited workers, and scattered the money they obtained through the money houses on the periphery into the wilderness. They had already taken up a lot of land in the surrounding provinces. As for how many shameful methods they had used, no one knew. Additionally, these treasurers in the palace treasury bullied the lower-level workers and took advantage of men and women. The higher-ranking treasurers paid attention to their face, but the middle-ranked 30-year-old treasurers were naked and shameless. One of the treasurers Fan Xian found in the middle of the night had 12 concubines at home. As for how those 20-year-old concubines came about, who could say? They only knew that every year, there would be workers making trouble. As for those who complained, they could not be counted. However, the palace treasury was special. Often, the victims of these complaints could not leave the palace treasury. Even if they were lucky enough to make it to Suzhou, they would always be fooled by the court. Offending good people was a small matter, but offending the treasurers was a big matter. This was the consensus of the Jiangnan road officials. Thus, after the new head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, the imperial envoy Fan Xian, arrived at the North Min Yamen, the lower-level workers and commoners who held a bone-deep hatred for the treasurers no longer beat the drums and cried out their grievances. Instead, they looked coldly at the door of the yamen. A glimmer of dark fire flashed through their eyes. The moment the fire appeared, the sound of firecrackers rang out, and red confetti filled the air. The front door of the North Min Palace Treasury Transport Company Yamen slowly opened. Dozens of officials dressed in formal robes filed in amidst the slightly smoky smell. They split into two rows and bowed respectfully to the young official in the middle. Fan Xian brought out the imperial edict, brought out the sword, showed his identity as the imperial envoy, and explained the rules of management. He looked at his subordinates below and pressed his hands together. "Sit. Thank you for the seat." The officials of the palace treasury tidied up their clothing and sat down. There were not enough seats in the yamen, so some of the lower-level officials stood at the back. Everyone looked at the warm smile on Sir Fan Jr.'s face and felt slightly reassured. Furthermore, they did not see the Overwatch Council's wolf-like Jingdo officials. Their slightly wary minds immediately relaxed. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked down. Very easily, he found his target among the crowd of officials. There were about 5 or 6 people. There were 3 people with dark complexions. They wore normal clothes with belts tied tightly around their waists. They sat there respectfully. It was clear that these 3 people did not have official positions, yet they sat among the crowd of officials. Furthermore, from their appearance, it was clear that they often went in and out of the workshops. It was a bit of an eyesore. Fan Xian's eyes were particularly sharp. He saw a glimmer of indifference and disdain toward him in their seemingly respectful and cautious manner. It was an expression of great confidence. He smiled slightly. Someone as calm and sinister as him would not be angered by the other party's expression. However, since the other party had been raised by the eldest princess for so many years, and he wanted to completely control the palace treasury, he had to knock them down a peg or two. He first put aside the 3 people and told the officials about the court's intentions. He then chatted a bit with the military representative sitting to his right. This military official was a distant relative of the Yi family. Although the Yi family seemed to have been forced to the second prince's side by the emperor, due to the existence of Yi Linger, the relationship between Fan Xian and the Yi family was still passable. Thus, the Yi family general was particularly respectful toward Fan Xian. Presumably, the family in the capital had given him some orders. After all the official matters had been said, Fan Xian suddenly quieted down. He raised his teacup and took a sip. The Qing kingdom did not have the custom of serving tea to send off guests. The officials knew that Sir Fan must have something important to say, so they all quieted down. Everyone already knew that Sir Fan Jr.'s inaugural speech in the bamboo sheds at the Suzhou docks beside the river had already shocked all of the Jiangnan road officials. They couldn't help but be curious about his words today. The palace treasury is truly a strange place, Fan Xian said with a smile. The officials also smiled along. The deputy added, in the wilderness, there is only knocking and banging. Although it is annoying, it is different. Fan Xian also smiled. I thought the reason it was strange was because, on this trip south by imperial edict, every time I opened the yamen and revealed my identity, there would always be a local victim who would beat the drum and cry out their grievances, saying that the local officials had done many illegal things. I didn't expect that after opening the yamen for half a day, in such a large place, there would not be a single commoner who would submit a petition. The officials paused and silently cursed. You've been stealthily heading south, what kind of grievances are there? But for Fan Xian to say this, there must be something else. They couldn't help but feel their hearts rise. Of course, Fan Xian's words were nonsense. It was just a prelude. I am greatly gratified that under the governance of my colleagues, the palace treasury is clean and tidy. There is no illegal activity. It is truly rare. The officials' faces heated up. They repeatedly said they didn't dare to. Fan Xian's face did not darken. He only smiled and said, but, there is another question. I don't know if there is truly nothing wrong with the palace treasury, or, some officials have too much authority, so even if the commoners and workers have complaints in their hearts, they don't dare to say it to me? These words were too careless. It was an undisguised attempt to frame someone for a crime. Regardless of faction, the officials were all local officials of the palace treasury. Their hearts froze and a glimmer of disgust grew in them. They thought, even if you want to burn 3 fires, you can't use such an absurd method. With the deputy in the lead, the officials all stepped out and said in a loud voice, Sir, there is no such thing, there is no such thing. Fan Xian lowered his head. His fingers gently rubbed the cuffs Cece had just sewn and asked, there is no such thing? I heard that these years, the 3 large workshops owe their workers a great deal of wages. Last year, there was even a major incident. Is there such a thing? The officials paused. Last year, because the treasurers had exploited them too harshly, the workers of the 3 large workshops had indeed caused a commotion and 2 people had died. This matter had long been hidden by the officials of the transport company. Unexpectedly, the news had traveled to Jingdo. Since Sir Fan had already said it, then he must have received accurate information. It would be difficult to hide it. The deputy quickly went forward and smiled apologetically. Before the year, the return of funds was a bit slow. The wages were only paid 3 days late. In the end, those unruly people took the opportunity to cause trouble and caused the 3 large workshops to stop work for a day. It brought irreparable damage to the court. Thus, after the transport company discussed it, we asked General Yi to suppress it. Fortunately, not too many lives were lost. Thinking that it was close to the end of the year and you would be arriving soon, there was no rush to report it. In reality, it was not that the wages had been paid late. More accurately, it was that the treasurers had taken too much of the wages they had given out. Under the accumulated anger, the public's anger gradually rose, and the workers began to make trouble. The officials of the transport company did not want to offend the treasurers, nor did they want to take out public silver to make up for the debt. Thus, they pretended to be deaf and dumb. Only when the matter grew did they mobilize troops to suppress it. Fan Xian turned around and quietly said a few words to General Yi. The general's face revealed an awkward expression and quietly responded. Presumably, the role he played in this matter was not honorable. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and gently knocked on the table beside him. Everyone, to put it bluntly, this palace treasury is a business. However, it is the emperor's business and the Qing court's business. Since it does business, then the most important thing is the people who do it. Year after year, delaying the workers' wages. Who would be willing to work for you? Even if they did work, how could they be willing to put their heart into it? In the end, isn't it still the court that loses out? The officials repeatedly voiced their agreement. They all said that in the future, they would strictly follow the rules of the palace treasury and that there would be no more delaying of wages. As for what would happen in the future, that was for the treasurers to deal with Sir Fan Jr. These officials only hoped to quickly deceive the scene in front of them. However, the expressions of the three dark-skinned figures sitting in the chairs without official robes became somewhat ugly. Just talking nonsense. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. Naturally, we won't be delaying in the future. Then what about those we owed in the past? The main hall of the yamen immediately sank into a death-like silence. In their fear, the officials did not say anything more. There were tens of thousands of palace treasury workers. Adding on food, lodging, water, clothing, and a series of other logistics, the number of people reached a terrifying level. The court set generous wages for the workers of the three workshops. Drawing water from them had become one of the biggest sources of wealth for the palace treasury officials. If Fan Xian really wanted these officials to spit out all of the deductions from the past few years, it would be a large sum. These officials knew in their hearts that they were hindered by the Qing law and the Overwatch Council's investigation, so they never dared to eat openly. It was only a small gift from the treasurers after they had eaten. Sir Fan was probably targeting those treasurers. Thus, the gazes of the officials swept, intentionally or unintentionally, across the three of them. It was as if Fan Xian did not sense the turbulence in the dark. In an even voice, he said, "The court cannot owe its people. The debts from the past few years will have to be gradually made up. However, the matter is complicated and cannot be rushed." Cannot be rushed. The hearts of the officials once again relaxed, but they were greatly frightened by what he said next. 3 days. Fan Xian smiled slightly and extended 3 fingers. Gazing at the officials, he said, "I give you all 3 days to fill in all of the debts for me. Make up all of the wages owed to the workers below. Remember, use the interest from Taiping Money House as the basis. After 3 days, if there are still workers who come to me and say they have not received their wages," Fan Xian said. Fan Xian said, "Or perhaps my subordinates in the Overwatch Council have found out. Sorry, everyone, I will have to show some ruthlessness." Although he was smiling, the officials could already feel a chill beginning to spread around them. The 3 brothers who had been sitting calmly finally could not sit still. With humble expressions, they stood up and said, "Sir, I have something to report." "Speak." Fan Xian glanced at him with great interest. "There may be cases of delayed wages, but the amount is not large. Furthermore, it is often because the accounts are not going smoothly." The person chuckled. "Sir, you have come from far away in Jingdo. Perhaps you do not know how powerful the unruly people in these places are. Those people bring their families to work. It is clearly one person working in the workshop, but he has to report 3 people. It is not that we have delayed wages, it is that they want to swindle the court of silver." "Oh?" Fan Xian made a sound of surprise. "There is such a trick?" "Yes." The person clearly did not see the sarcasm in Fan Xian's words. Overjoyed, he said, "Sir, those workers are sly and cunning. Relying on the fact that the court cares for the people, they dare to make exorbitant demands. If there are any demands that cannot be met, they will slack off. There are even worse fellows who dare to tamper with the process. These years, who knows how much silver the court has lost." This person poured dirty water on the workers. No matter how good Commissioner Fan's reputation was, he was still an official. How could he sit on the side of the workers? As the saying goes, one's position determines one's position. There was no need to worry about not standing on the side of the workers. Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. These words pushed all of his frequent crimes onto the workers. But his expression was not happy. He sighed. Ah, I did not expect the emperor to be so benevolent, and yet these people are still so unsatisfied. The person smiled apologetically. It is indeed so. When I return, I will investigate the matter of delayed wages. But those workers who have caused trouble cannot be easily forgiven. Sir, do not be fooled by the words of these scoundrels. Those people are sly and cunning, and they are truly not good people. Fan Xian looked at this person and suddenly furrowed his brows. May I ask who you are? At the side, the deputy quickly made an introduction. This is the master of the first workshop, Sir Shao. Sir Shao? Fan Xian seemed a little surprised. Master of the first workshop? The head of the treasurers? The master of the 3 workshops, surnamed Shao, quickly bowed. That is me. Fan Xian stared at him for a moment and suddenly opened his mouth. You are a mere master, nothing more than a little treasurer. The court has given you an unranked rank. You don't even have an official position. How dare you call yourself a lowly official in front of me? Everyone was startled. His voice suddenly became cold. You keep calling yourself a lowly official. What kind of official are you? This is the first time the yamen has opened its doors. You, a mere master, are not waiting outside to be summoned. Instead, you dare to barge into the hall and sit among the court officials. How dare you? Dare I ask, what kind of bastard and daring thing are you? The hall was silent for a long time. It was not until a long time later that the officials heard clearly that Sir Fan was cursing. Immediately, the hall exploded with a roar. How could this be? Ever since the palace treasury had been returned to the royal family, this was the first time someone had pointed at the faces of the masters of the 3 workshops and cursed. Even the eldest princess, who had come to the North Min Yamen for the first time after taking over the palace treasury, was very gentle toward the 3 masters of the 3 workshops. How could Sir Fan dare to curse them? The master of the first workshop, Sir Shao, was also stunned. He had not thought that even if Sir Fan did not want to win him over, he would not give him face and curse him so fiercely. He gave a muffled grunt and his expression immediately became ugly. However, facing a proper prince, he did not dare to say anything. He resentfully raised his hands in a salute and returned to his seat to be a quiet bodhisattva. Remove his seat. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and furrowed his brows into a beautiful little circle. In an even voice, he said, there is no seat for him in front of me. Sir Fan. The master flew into a rage. Before his buttocks had even touched the seat, he straightened his body again. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, he said, don't go too far. Fan Xian completely ignored this person. He drank his tea and chatted with the awkward-looking General Yi and the deputy beside him. As they spoke, the Overwatch Council officials beside him had already gone down. They pushed Sir Shao to the side and removed his seat. Thus, the matter became serious. Not only did the officials below all come out to plead for leniency, even General Yi lowered his voice and said by Fan Xian's ear, young Master Fan, leave them some face. Leave them some face? Fan Xian smiled and said. Today, I have come especially to rip their faces off. General Yi was stupefied and didn't continue to speak. Ever since the opening of the palace treasury yamen, the masters of the 3 workshops all had their own seats in the yamen. Their positions were special, and no one had ever humiliated their existence like this. Seeing the master of the first workshop being humiliated, the other 2 masters of the 3rd workshop could no longer sit still. They rose to stand beside Sir Shao and said to Fan Xian in a cold voice, since you think there is no place for us in the yamen, why don't we remove it together? In any case, the 3 workshops are nothing more than lowly people. They were not acting out of spite. They were using the 3 workshops to pressure others. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at the 3 masters standing in a row in front of him. He smiled slightly and said, "Of course, we will remove it together. Do you think there will still be a place for you?" Of course, the 3 workshops are not all lowly people, but since you have all admitted it, I will believe you. Sir. The masters of the 3 workshops had not expected Fan Xian to press forward step by step. His words did not leave any room for retreat. Only now did they know that he was not only trying to establish his might, he was trying to kill them all. But, what confidence did Fan Xian have? Did he really want to see the 3 workshops collapse? The tone of the masters of the 3 workshops once again became ruthless. Sir, how have the 3 workshops offended you? Exploiting wages, bullying men and women, using skills to threaten the court, disrespecting me, of course. Fan Xian stared at the 3 of them and said, "You have not offended me. You have offended the workers in the 3 workshops, as well as the court and the people who support you. If you wish to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext," the 3 masters said angrily. The 3 masters said angrily, "Sir, you have just come to the transport company, yet you act so recklessly. Does the Qing court really not have any rules?" Rules? I am the rules, Fan Xian thought with a smile. Of course, he didn't say these words out loud. He just remembered that when Second Fan had run amok in Jingdo, his favorite thing to say was these ruthless words. It looked like being an official was the same as being a thug. When encountering a chaotic situation where the situation was unclear, it was always possible to use some brutal techniques. These 3 people are making a ruckus in the hall. Drag them out and give them 10 strokes of the paddle first. Fan Xian gently placed the teacup in his hand on the table and ignored the pleading words of the officials below. He smiled and thought that he was suffering and tyrannical, but he was impatient. How could he waste his breath on these people? Chapter 351. Pa, 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 pa. The sound was crisp. It was not like the muffled sound of the cane landing on the bodies of the imperial censorate outside the royal palace. Instead, it was like someone was beating the beat to a piece of music with a strong sense of rhythm. The beat only fell 10 times before it ended. In the end, the 3 workshop masters were not like Brother Baoyu, who breathed in but did not exhale, nor did they faint like Second Fan. Fan Xian watched the scene with great interest. He couldn't help but be surprised at the toughness of these 3 masters. After being beaten 10 times, they did not even make a sound. He was someone who knew his subordinate's style. Since he had yelled for them to be beaten, not a single one dared to hold back. The 3 masters lay sprawled on the long bench. Their clothes had been lifted up, and their pants had been pulled down. Their buttocks and backs were covered in red marks. They looked wretched, but they had suffered too much humiliation. In front of Fan Xian, they forced themselves not to make a sound for mercy. However, it was always painful to be beaten. Other than the pain, there was also a shred of humiliation from having their clothes ripped off. It made tears begin to well up in the eyes of these middle-aged men. They were watery and filled with hatred, like pitiful puppies. Fan Xian clapped his hands and said, "Strike them out." Yes, his subordinates replied in unison. They helped the 3 masters up and walked out of the yamen. Behind these 3 masters, who had long been humiliated beyond measure, Fan Xian did not forget to call out like a merchant, 3 days, 3 days, don't you forget." The yamen immediately quieted down. The gazes of the officials looking at Fan Xian grew a glimmer of fear. Everyone under heaven knew of Fan Xian's reputation, but they were not from Jingdo. These officials had not personally experienced the coldness hidden within Fan Xian's clean and scholarly reputation. They were not as clear of the pain as the civil officials the second prince had sent. But today, everyone finally saw it. Other than being secretly afraid, they also couldn't help but sneer. Beating him was fine. He was beating the treasurers, and it was for us officials to see. However, no matter how knowledgeable Sir Fan was, he was still completely ignorant of the affairs of the palace treasury. Now that he had offended the masters of the 3 large workshops, it would be interesting to see how he would clean up after this. Perhaps Fan Xian did not know that his subordinates and officials had the intention of watching a show 3 days later. Perhaps he did not care about this at all. He casually said a few more words and ordered everyone to pay back their debts within 3 days. If there was anything illegal, they were to investigate themselves. He then let the officials out of the yamen. He left behind the general from the Yi family and his close assistant, the vice commissioner of the transport division. In many ways, he still needed the help of these 2 people to do what he was going to do in 3 days. No one knew what he said to the 2 officials in the back garden, but their expressions grew heavier and heavier. In the end, they slowly nodded their heads, bowed respectfully to Fan Xian, and left. Sir. Su Wenmao handed over the intelligence report the Overwatch Council had sent up. Fan Xian accepted it and nodded slightly as he read. It looked like the people of the 4th Bureau still had some use. However, these years, they had been suppressed by the eldest princess and the treasurers from top to bottom and hadn't had a chance to display their skills. Su Wenmao looked at him immersed in the file and thought of the scene earlier. He couldn't help but furrow his brows. Gathering his courage, he quietly said, "The masters of the 3 large workshops were killed." Fan Xian raised his head to glance at him and couldn't resist smiling. Of course they were killed. However, killing is not like cooking. If you can eat, you can eat. If you can kill, you don't have to be in a hurry to kill. Sir was too gentle earlier. Su Wenmao came from the 1st Bureau of the Overwatch Council. When it came to managing officials, he was always vicious and merciless. He truly felt that Fan Xian's earlier punishment had been too kind. It was merely 3 masters. If they were killed, then they were killed. Since they wanted to establish their might, then they had to strike like lightning. How could he speak for so long and only give them 10 beatings? He unhappily said, "Sir, you only gave them 10 beatings earlier. That was too light. I'm afraid it will make these people feel dissatisfied." Fan Xian waved the Overwatch Council intelligence report in his hand and calmly said, "Based on the evidence in my hand, if I chopped off those 3 heads with 1 stroke, no one would dare say anything." Su Wenmao was startled. Since this was the case, why had the thunder and rain been small earlier and let go of those 3 people who had no law in their eyes? Fan Xian smiled and explained, "Thunder and rain, they are all grace. If I had punished them harshly earlier, although the officials and the treasurers would not be satisfied in their hearts and would even grow jealous out of fear, they could only agree. Furthermore, they would be intimidated by the sharpness of the executioner's knife and would become obedient. These 3 days. I'm afraid that in less than a day, the officials will all make up for the deficit. As for the treasurers, they will crazily send silver to the yamen. Isn't this the situation you want to see?" Su Wenmao became more and more confused. Fan Xian waved his hand. "Wrong. Suppressing it for a while and only killing the masters of the 3 workshops, what fundamental change can there be for the palace treasury? It's like hunting monkeys in the mountains. If you kill the Monkey King, the monkeys will scatter in all directions. You also know that it is impossible for me to, and I do not want to, guard the palace treasury for a long time. What will happen in the future after we leave? Those monkeys will run out from the mountains again and steal our corn to eat." Su Wenmao's heart jumped. He understood something. The monkeys the commissioner spoke of were the numerous treasurers of the 3 workshops. If he beheaded the masters of the 3 workshops, the treasurers would obediently spit out the silver and return the wages owed to the workers. However, in that case, the commissioner would lose the opportunity to strike again. In the future, when the commissioner left North Min and returned to Hangzhou, far away from Shannon Road, the treasurers would probably become active again. The workers of the 3 workshops would probably have to face even more tragic revenge. "This is squeezing out pus," Fan Xian said with a smile. "Your face looks flat, but the pus is still inside, so we don't rush to scrub first. Instead, we need to open up the pores and squeeze out all of the pus." Su Wenmao was startled. It was clear he had never taken beauty classes, but he understood Fan Xian's meaning. He smiled and said, "The complicated you speak of, isn't it to lure the snake out of its hole?" "Lure what?" "This is called beating the snake to startle the snake." Fan Xian touched his smooth hair and found that his description was not very appropriate. He couldn't resist smiling and said, "In any case, in 3 days' time, the humiliation of the 3 workshops being flogged 10 times. Presumably, those arrogant and willful treasurers would not be able to endure it no matter what. What if someone makes up for the silver? What then?" Su Wenmao asked with confusion. He was worried that after the commissioner's reputation spread, those little monkeys would not have the courage to jump out. "Learn from past mistakes to avoid future mistakes, cure the illness and save the patient," Fan Xian said seriously. Fan Xian said very seriously, "As long as the treasurers who have not violated the Qing law completely return the silver, I will naturally give them a chance to turn over a new leaf. I am here to manage the palace treasury, not to break it. Understood? When it comes to enemies, we have to divide them, carry out order, treat them separately, and unite all that can be united. Let's see who jumps out in 3 days and we'll know who is rejecting my good intentions." Fan Xian smiled slightly. "Not only are we targeting the treasurers, presumably, the trusted aides the eldest princess left in the palace treasury will not let go of such a great opportunity. From Xinyang's perspective, if I offend all the treasurers, the palace treasury will naturally sink into paralysis. At this time, they will certainly jump out. Have the people of the 4th Bureau keep a close eye on them for the next 2 days and finally draw up a list. I will ask these unstable elements to leave one by one." Su Wenmao finally understood everything. The commissioner was going to do a thorough cleanup. He thought back to the conversation in the garden earlier and carefully said, "Only, sir, the deputy is someone from Ren Qian's clan, so he can be trusted. But the Yi family?" Fan Xian knew what he was worried about. According to the news from Jingdou, a few days after the Great Prince married the Great Princess of Northern Qi, Yi Ling'er finally married the second prince. The second prince had also used this opportunity to be released from his house arrest with the Empress Dowager's intervention. "Don't worry about anything, I didn't say too much. I just had General Yi pay attention to the routes out of the treasury. I'm not so arrogant as to think I can subdue the Yi family with just a few words." Fan Xian smiled. What he had General Yi do was actually to prevent the treasurers from taking advantage of their location and secretly moving out the silver they had swallowed these years. Although most of the stolen silver had been used to buy land, the property deeds, the temperament of the treasurers had determined that they could only be left in their own homes. Furthermore, don't casually connect the Yi family to the second prince and the eldest princess, Fan Xian said after thinking for a bit. The Yi and Qin families are known together in the world. They are not as simple as most people think. How could they one-sidedly lean toward one prince? That would be too stupid. Even if he leans, before the situation is clear, he will still have to give me some face. To fall out with me for the sake of a group of treasurers, unless Yi Zhong truly resents the emperor for not sending him farther away. Su Wenmao froze and didn't say anything more. He accepted his orders and left. Fan Xian sat in the chair and sank into silence. A moment later, he sighed. In the end, Yi Ling'er was married. What would the second prince's fate be in the future? He was not a kind person, but in the tea shop outside Baoyue brothel, he had once said that the reason he had beaten the second prince into the dust was because he wanted to keep him alive. This was partly because of his relationship with Yilinger. Another reason was that he subconsciously wanted to compete with the emperor, who was particular about raising his son, to see if he knew how to play or if he knew how to play. For many months, the Yi family had been played by the emperor. With no other choice, they could only get closer and closer to the second prince. Thinking of this, Fan Xian had a belly full of anger. Perhaps the emperor's deep planning and foresight was true, but as an emperor, his paranoia was even more true. It seemed that people sitting in different positions all had their own limitations. The emperor sitting on the dragon chair, his limitation was that he was too paranoia. First, he used the bestowal of marriage to test the waters. Then, without reason, he gradually raised his guard and shamelessly framed the Yi family, forcing them to stand against the crown prince. The crown prince? Then why did the third prince follow him out of the capital? The emperor was truly not someone who ate porridge. He always played tricks that people couldn't see through. Fan Xian was a bit vexed. He immediately comforted himself that he, a little bastard, couldn't understand. Perhaps the old bastard was also messing things up and he himself didn't understand. As for why Fan Xian was so determined not to reconcile with his mother-in-law, it was not because he had been bullied by his son-in-law during the course of their relationship. It was also not just because of the reason he had told Haitang to look after the family business. The most practical reason was that if Fan Xian and the eldest princess truly joined hands, the combined power of the two sides would reach a terrifying level. It would be enough to shake the foundations of the Qing kingdom. This was something the Qing emperor would definitely not allow. For Fan Xian, who did not have the power of the world in his hands, his current way of doing things was that great wisdom appeared stupid. As long as the emperor did not allow it, he would not do it unless someone wanted to kill him. In the next 2 days, the imperial envoy Fan Xian, who had just arrived in the palace treasury, brought his 7 serving girls and gorgeously inspected the workshops. He gradually became familiar with the process of the palace treasury and gained a deeper understanding of the Yi family's power. It was inevitable that he would touch the wood beside the water wheel by the river and sigh with an endless sense of vicissitudes. Occasionally, he would sit and discuss with the workers in the workshop about the art of blowing glass. It was a pity that his skills were too poor and his face was too beautiful. He could not blow successfully, but the texture of the glass was undoubtedly revealed. After 2 days, most of the workshops closer to the yamen knew what the new official looked like. As for the legendary Sir Fan Jr., although they didn't dare to look at him directly, they still sneaked a few careful glances. They all said that this noble young master was very good-looking, but his hands and feet were a bit clumsy. His personality was also very kind. The 7 serving girls at his side were all as pretty as flowers and jade. However, one of the serving girls was not very pretty. Her way of doing things and walking had the style of a country bumpkin. She did not look like a girl from a large family. On the other side, the 4 lines of defense formed by the military and the Overwatch Council suddenly tightened their patrolling work. The palace treasury's patrolling had always been the strictest place in the world. With the sudden tightening, they immediately found some forbidden items. Although they were not the secrets of the palace treasury's techniques, they were still heavy items. They were light pieces of paper, but they were heavy land deeds. As Fan Xian had expected, the first reaction of the treasurers and related officials, including the masters of the 3 large workshops, after the 3-day order came out was to find a way to move the most valuable things on them out and give them to their friends and relatives outside the palace treasury. However, after encountering a strict search, the officials and treasurers finally lost all hope. They knew that the new imperial envoy would not allow them to move their property. If they kept the property on paper by their side. God, if they didn't make up for the deficit in 3 days, wouldn't their property be confiscated? Furthermore, how could these people be clean? If the imperial envoy wanted to find fault with them, death was the word left and right. Dan De and General Lin's work was clearly effective. From the second day onwards, no one tried to move their property. A cold wind began to blow between the manors of the palace treasury and the 3 large workshops. As for who the source of the wind was, naturally, there were spies sent out to quietly find out. It was night. Heavy rain fell from the sky in Min, and the river swelled. Although there were no problems because of the dam, the cold wind howling angrily and the turbid waves rising into the air had already begun to make many people feel strange. The treasurers, who felt a strong sense of danger, began to link up. From top to bottom, there were more than 200 treasurers. They all had their own plans in the face of the 3-day order. Some of them still had a conscience and were prepared to return the stolen money and start anew. Some of them were afraid of Fan Xian's power and began to secretly prepare to report their colleagues' illegal actions to fight for their innocence. Even more people began to gather in the manor of the masters of the 3 large workshops and secretly discussed how to handle this matter. After the 3 masters of the 3 large workshops were beaten, they could only lie in bed. Although they were in 3 different places, the hatred in their hearts toward Fan Xian and the bitter resentment in their eyes were of one heart. In any case, they were not willing to lower their heads to Fan Xian because they had done too many bad things. Even if they lowered their heads, they would probably not be able to escape death in the future. Among the collusion of these treasurers, the confidant that Xinyang had left in the treasurers also played a vile role. Using the name of the princess far away in Jingdo, he assured the treasurers that the court's first concern was still the production and profit of the palace treasury and not the small pieces of silver that they were greedy for. What about 1 chopstick? What about 10 chopsticks? In any case, most of the treasurers finally huddled together tightly and began to smash like bowling balls toward Imperial Envoy Fan Xian, who seemed to know nothing and only knew how to take a beauty with him. On the last day of the 3-day order, Fan Xian followed the rules of the previous 2 days and stayed in the yamen to discuss matters in the morning. Although the treasurers had not voluntarily handed over the stolen goods and admitted their guilt, many of the officials had returned some silver. As for whether or not they had returned the full amount, that was a matter for the future and could be discussed later. At least on the surface, they had acted respectfully. There were also some treasurers who secretly admitted their guilt and took the initiative to climb up to the Overwatch Council to be tainted witnesses. Naturally, Fan Xian accepted them with a smile. It looked like the other party was indeed not a piece of iron. The palace treasury's casting skills were indeed not up to standard. He drank his tea and looked at the fine rain outside the hall in a daze. He slowly thought of the heavy rain last night. Would the Qing kingdom suffer another flood this year? It looked like he had to hurry. Otherwise, before the silver his father wanted could be transported to the banks of the Yangtze River, the banks would collapse again. Sir! An extremely panicked voice exploded like a muffled thunder, waking Fan Xian from his thoughts of a saint. Fan Xian looked with bewilderment and saw a group of officials in completely drenched robes run in. These officials were all people who had gone to each workshop to announce the 3-day order's deadline. Why had they all run back? The person in the lead was the second in command of the palace treasury, the deputy of the transport company, Ma Jie. With a face full of shock, he pulled at the front of his robes and rushed in without a care for the dirty water and wet shoes. Sir Ma, why are you so panicked? Fan Xian looked at him and furrowed his brows slightly, putting on a chow air. Sir, it's not good. Although Ma Jie had long known that the treasurers would certainly retaliate against the 3-day order, suddenly hearing of this matter, he couldn't help panicking and quickly came to report to Fan Xian. The 3 large workshops are on strike. Fan Xian was slightly startled and stood dumbly on the stone steps. Ma Jie thought the imperial envoy had also been shaken by the sudden bad news. He wiped the rain from his face and smiled bitterly. This is good, this is good. The 3 large workshops were on strike? This was something that had never happened since the Qing kingdom had taken over the palace treasury. In reality, Fan Xian had not killed anyone. The methods he had used were not as bloody as the eldest princesses. However, the problem was that Fan Xian had issued the 3-day order and had the power of spies in his hands that the eldest princess did not have. He had also blocked the treasurer's plans to transfer their family property. It was the same as preparing to swallow up the money the treasurers had harshly withheld these years. What was money? Money was the life of most people. Thus, the treasurers dared to use such a shocking move as a strike to fight Fan Xian to the death. Fan Xian was only slightly startled and immediately came to his senses. A faint smile rose to the corners of his lips. In reality, he was not shocked by the intensity of the treasurer's reactions. He was just thinking that this world also had a strike. Sir, what do we do? Should we first take back the 3-day order? Ma Jia asked with a face full of hope. He did not approve of Fan Xian issuing the 3-day order. Now that the treasurers had truly gone on strike and the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury stopped work for 1 day, how much silver would the court lose? Who would be able to shoulder such a large crime? Even if Fan Xian's family background was different from normal people and he was not afraid of the opinions of the people, the emperor would not easily forgive him. Contrary to the expectations of Ma Jia and the other officials, Fan Xian gently stroked the glossy strands of hair on his head and stretched his neck. A faint trace of excitement appeared on his face. As expected, they did not disappoint me. They made a big commotion. This is good. When I catch up, I will kill them all. The officials stood stupidly in the fine rain. On the wooden beam of the yamen, a pair of swallows danced gently. In the sky full of rain, Fan Xian wore the black robe of the Overwatch Council and led the officials of the transport company, a total of over 20 people, hurriedly to the first workshop that had called for a strike. The officials stood outside the workshop and found that they could not hear the sizzling sound of the furnaces. There was also no black smoke coming out of the workshop. There was a death-like silence. Everyone couldn't resist casting their gazes on Fan Xian, thinking, how exactly was he going to deal with this silent protest? No one knew that the Qinian unit and the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau who had followed Fan Xian to Jiangnan were already wearing raincoats and waiting silently not far from the workshop for orders. Even further away, General Ye's face was heavy as he clenched his fists tightly. His heart was perturbed as he spoke with Su Wenmao beside him. His mind was completely on the workshop that was on strike. Behind the two of them, a battalion of soldiers with knives and spears in their hands were waiting. The people on strike in the first workshop were all gathered in this large workshop. There was still the remnants of heat from last night inside the workshop. This was where they were responsible for making glass. Fan Xian walked with steady steps into the workshop and raised his head to glance at the tall roof of the workshop. He sighed in admiration and said, "The rain protection is done well." The workers were huddled in 2s and 3s at the back. Their faces were full of fear. These lower-level workers did not know why they had suddenly stopped work. Looking at the newly arrived imperial envoy, their hearts were filled with fear. In front of the workshop, a dozen green-robed treasurers forced themselves to remain calm and bowed to Fan Xian. "Why hasn't work started?" "Good to let you know." Master Shao, who was still injured behind him, glanced at Fan Xian with a hateful gaze. Last night, the rain was too heavy and extinguished the furnace. It washed away the molds, so there is no way to start work. The master and treasurers were not idiots. They knew they couldn't openly say they were on strike. Otherwise, if Fan Xian really went crazy and raised a knife to kill them all, they could still justify it. Thus, they could only find some reasons. In reality, they were still using the strike to threaten the other party. Perhaps this was the so-called art of negotiation. In terms of poetry, Fan Xian could be said to be an artist, but his job was often to destroy art without any sense of beauty. With a heavy face, he said, "The molds are ruined, and the furnace is wet. What about the second workshop? Could the molten steel that could burn people to death have also solidified? Can a spinning machine also rust?" Without waiting for Master Shao to reply, he narrowed his eyes and said, "I think you treasurers are the ones whose brains have truly become rusty." There was no such thing as negotiation. Fan Xian only needed someone to make trouble. It was necessary to change the technical director of the palace treasury. How could he miss this opportunity? "Come, cut off this Master Zhao's head for me and use his blood to warm the furnace." Fan Xian clapped his hands and said evenly. Master Shao paused as if he didn't understand the meaning of the imperial envoy's words. Just as Fan Xian's voice fell, the Overwatch Council officials wearing raincoats had already walked into the workshop. A subordinate lifted up a chair for Fan Xian to sit. A few others had already cleanly kicked Master Shao to the ground and pulled him to the side of the furnace about 50 feet away from Fan Xian. Fan Xian waved his hand. The officials of the transport company behind him broke into an uproar. Deputy Ma Kai's anxiety attacked his heart and he cried out in fear, "Sir, you can't." Master Shao, who had been pushed to the mouth of the furnace, finally came to his senses. He knew the imperial envoy really wanted to kill him, really dared to kill him. He began to struggle with all his might. His feet kicked against the dirt on the ground, making a rustling sound. With a sobbing tone, he cried out, "Spare me, sir, spare me." There were many fools in the world who could not see through the ways of the world. It was a bit too late to beg for mercy when they were about to lose their lives. The eyes of the treasurers who were on good terms with Master Shao were about to burst. They all rushed forward, wanting to save Master Shao. With a whoosh, a snow-white knife light flashed. A head with a dark complexion rolled into the furnace. Fresh blood sprayed out and hit the walls of the furnace. Countless cries of shock exploded in the workshop. Everyone was shocked by the bloody scene in front of them. The young treasurers howled in pain and fear. In a flash, they stopped moving forward at the same time. Their survival instincts finally won over the heat in their hearts. Fan Xian glanced at the body at the mouth of the furnace and then at the hundreds of workers gathered together with faces full of fear. Calmly, he said, "I kill people, naturally I have my reasons." Chapter 352. The rain pattered down and hit the roof of the workshop with a pitter-patter. It formed a clear contrast with the death-like silence below the roof. The workers in the workshop gathered fearfully at the very back. The terror on their faces was not hidden, but everyone's hands had already begun to unconsciously touch the metal shovels and wooden boards. No one knew what would happen next. Standing at the front, the treasurers in charge of the strike had faces full of fear. Looking at the imperial envoy sitting in a chair at the entrance of the workshop, no one paid any more attention to the already dead Master Shao. No one even dared to glance at the wretched sight of the decapitated body by the mouth of the stove. They only stared in terror at Fan Xian's warm and gentle face. Everyone's feet unconsciously retreated. One person retreated, 10 people retreated, everyone retreated. The footsteps of the treasurers as they retreated made a rustling sound, like millipedes crawling in the desert. However, the workshop was only so big, and most of the space at the back was taken up by the thinly dressed workers. Where could these green-clothed treasurers retreat to? Fan Xian looked at the scene in front of him and unconsciously shook his head. In an even voice, he said, "I am not a ruthless person. Workers, do not be afraid. The court is only investigating the matter of the treasurer's embezzlement and deduction of pay. It has nothing to do with you." The workers at the very back looked at each other. Their emotions were slightly calmer, but they did not completely trust this young official. Their hands still gripped the handles of the metal shovels. You Even if you are an official of the court, how can you randomly kill people? One of the treasurers finally could not stand the pressure of this silence and cried out in a sharp voice. At this moment, the deputy of the transport company, Ma Jie, was standing stupidly behind Fan Xian. He had not expected that Fan Xian would first behead a master of the workshop without saying anything. This matter had gotten out of hand. How was he going to clean it up? In a trembling voice, he said with shock and anger, "Imperial envoy, why? Everything can be discussed, it's over, it's all over." In Ma Jie's heart, the most important thing in the palace treasury was the group of treasurers in front of him. Only these people knew how to maintain the palace treasury. Even if Fan Xian beheaded a few dozen people today and forced these treasurers to submit, what about in the future? If the treasurers did things with resentment, who knew what would become of the palace treasury? What's more, there are still 2 managers of the first workshop who are also causing a strike. If they find out that you killed Manager Shao of the first workshop and incited public resentment, the strike will really continue. Oh my God! If you really killed everyone, who would do the work? Could they count on those illiterate workers? Fan Xian ignored the bewildered deputy beside him and motioned for Su Wenmao to come closer. He then said to everyone in the square in a clear voice, "Listen to every word I say." Everyone was taken aback. Su Wenmao took out a few pieces of paper from his drenched robe, squinted his eyes, and began to read loudly. "Today we have found out that the master of the first workshop of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, Shao Jing, has done many evil and illegal things since the beginning of the year." Su Wenmao furrowed his brows and glanced at the restless treasurers. He continued, "In the 2nd year and 3rd month of the Qing calendar, Shao Jing hid the Tong Mountain mine disaster and ate the dead's salary for 5 years. In total, it was 13,700 liang. In the 4th year and 9th month of the Qing calendar, Shao Jing bribed the Suzhou master Bo and bought 700 mu of fertile land at a low price. In the 6th year and 1st month of the Qing calendar, with Shao Jing as the leader, the masters of the 3 workshops and a group of treasurers owed the workers more than 10,000 in wages. This caused a riot. 14 people died and over 50 were injured. No one knew how many crimes he listed out. He read them until Su Wenmao's mouth was a little dry. At the end, he said, "The crimes are unforgivable. According to Qing law, they should be executed." He then took out a number of land deeds, the Suzhou master Bo's confession, and related evidence. "Don't ask me for evidence again," Fan Xian continued. "I have kept the witnesses, and I also have a lot of material evidence. Since I am the master of the palace treasury, I will not keep such a bastard like Shao Jing." The workers, who had been trembling uneasily, listened to the imperial envoy discuss the crimes and the list of crimes. They immediately thought of how tyrannical Shao Jing was and how harsh and sinister he was to the workers under him. Immediately, they felt that the imperial envoy had killed him well. He had killed him well. However, the hatred in the treasurer's eyes grew heavier. Someone shouted unhappily, "Even if you want to punish him, you have to open a court to try the case. If you want to pin a crime on someone, you can always find a pretext." When Deputy Ma Jie, who was standing behind Fan Xian, heard Su Wenmao read out the crimes, he knew that the imperial envoy was looking for an excuse. The things that Shao Jing had done were actually all known to the officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company. However, even if he had to be punished according to Qing law, he couldn't just randomly kill him like this. After all, Ma Jie wanted to maintain a good relationship with Fan Xian because of his cousin, Ren Shaoan. No matter how much he disagreed with Fan Xian's style of doing things, he forced his mouth shut and did not question it. He did not question it, but there were still trusted aides left behind by the eldest princess in the transport company who would not let go of this great opportunity. Sinisterly, they said, "Sir, you handle matters decisively. However, it seems that this kind of person who takes bribes and breaks the law should be openly tried and have him personally admit it. Only then can we be wary of thieves and thieves. Furthermore, you gave the treasurers a deadline of 3 days. These 3 days have not passed. Inevitably, the treasurers trembled, but they did not give up. Hearing that someone in the group of officials was speaking up for them, they gathered their courage and began to clamor. Fan Xian did not even turn his head. A cold smile rose to the corners of his lips. I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council and also the head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company. The Overwatch Council is responsible for investigating cases. The transport company follows the special Qing law, and the case is decided by the head of the transport company. What is wrong with trying him and beheading him? Besides, I am not using these crimes to behead him. He lowered his head slightly and smiled. Inciting the workers to make trouble, go on strike, and resist the emperor's edict. Do you think I cannot behead such a disrespectful person? The Qing law was meticulous. For something like killing, it was fine to do it in secret. However, for Fan Xian to kill openly like this, he needed a good excuse. If he only used Xiao Jing's illegal actions as a rope to justify his killing, it would give the officials and treasurers a good opportunity to refute. Beheading a criminal without investigating the case would not be justifiable in any yamen. However, Fan Xian was a very practical person. He had clearly investigated Xiao Jing's crimes, yet he said that he was beheaded because he disrespected the emperor's edict. Edicts were the most illusory of things. As the imperial envoy, he had the final right to explain. Furthermore, it was necessary for the Overwatch Council to investigate Xiao Jing's crimes. In the future, when the case was brought before the emperor in court in Jingdo, these crimes of forcefully buying good farmland and bullying people to death would be enough to stop any doubts after the fact. Killing at the moment to establish power and collecting evidence after the fact to stop the mouths of the people was a long-term plan. One person had already died in the large workshop of the first workshop. The workers had high hopes for the imperial envoy. The treasurers were as timid as mice. Although the officials had ulterior motives, they could not accuse Fan Xian to his face. The situation slightly stabilized. After another period of time, the second and third workshops also calmed down. However, because those two places were handled by General Yi in Danda, it took a bit more time. These two people were not as daring as Fan Xian. They only dared to capture people and not kill. The treasurers of the other two workshops were escorted by soldiers into the large workshops. The workers were strictly forbidden to stay in each workshop. Even so, the sudden influx of 200 green-clothed treasurers still made the large workshop immediately appear crowded. However, with the cold light of the military's knives and spears and the Overwatch Council's arrows pressing in, no matter how crowded the crowd was, no one dared to move. Seeing this scene, the officials of the transport company who had followed Fan Xian into the workshop were shocked. Only now did the officials know that the imperial envoy had long made arrangements for the situation on the last day of the 3-day order. Furthermore, he seemed to have long guessed that the treasurers would have an extreme reaction. For a moment, the trusted officials of Xinjiang were all disappointed. It looked like the chaos today would not be too big. At the same time, they were hoping that Fan Xian would be more ruthless later. It would be best if he could offend all of the treasurers. In the future, the palace treasury would decrease production and quality would drop. Let's see how you explain that to the emperor. After the workshop was quiet for a while, Fan Xian stood up from his chair. The small puffs of water that had been in his robe flowed to the ground. He looked at the group of treasurers in front of him. He saw that there was still dissatisfaction in their eyes. The treasurers who had been escorted here from the second and third workshops still had arrogant expressions. It was as if they did not know what had happened. Everyone is here, he said with a warm smile. He smiled warmly and said, "It rained heavily last night, and the fire in this workshop was extinguished. What about your side? Also, the workshop treasurers are clearly 30 or 40 li away. Why are you all so close to the yamen today? Even if the workshops have stopped work because of the rain, you should still go to your own workshops to keep an eye on them. It is still early. Have you all already gone and then turned back? He continued to talk to himself. The treasurers, through the explanation of the treasurers who had been left behind in the workshop, finally knew what had happened. Their faces gradually paled. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "This is good. Everyone's crime of going on strike has been confirmed. It will be easier for me to kill." After Master Zhao's unusual and straightforward death and the spread of words, the treasurers finally knew that the imperial envoy was a ruthless character who killed without blinking. Hearing these light words, the treasurers exploded with a buzz. Some begged for mercy, some cursed viciously, and some rolled their eyes as if trying to see if there was a dog hole in the workshop they could crawl out of. The crowd gradually dispersed. The situation was slightly chaotic. However, the Army and Overwatch Council on the outside kept a close watch and forced everyone back. 2 people squeezed out from among the treasurers. They were not bystanders. They were the 3 leaders of this strike, the main treasurers of the 2nd and 3rd workshops. Earlier, these 2 masters had been high-spirited in the largest workshop under their jurisdiction. Eloquently, they had directed the treasurers and workers to go on strike. Their words flowed like a river and their aura was astonishing. Although the workers looked weakly and unintentionally at the 2 of them, the hundreds of treasurers had been moved by their words. They thought that given the intelligence in their heads, the court would not be able to punish them severely. Of course, these 2 masters had also strictly ordered the treasurers to be incomparably respectful toward the imperial envoy. What they wanted was for the silver in their homes not to be taken by the court and not for them to truly rebel. Unexpectedly, not long after the strike, countless soldiers and secret agents of the Overwatch Council charged in from outside the workshop. Faced with weapons, the 2 masters' words immediately lost their power. They obediently allowed themselves to be captured and escorted here. Along the way, they were still confident. They thought to themselves that they knew what they were doing and that the imperial envoy would not be able to do anything to them. Unexpectedly, the imperial envoy did not know what he was doing. After standing in the crowd for a while, the 2 masters finally realized that Master Xiao, who had plotted with them to go on strike, had died. The 2 masters stood outside the crowd and looked around the workshop. Finally, they found Xiao Jing's body by the mouth of the stove. In an instant, the bloodstains and head stunned their hearts. The 2 of them cried out sorrowfully, "Sir Xiao! Sir Xiao!" There were knives and spears all around them, so they didn't dare to go to the side of the stove and cry out. However, they still raised their heads and glanced at Fan Xian with a venomous gaze. They knew that they would probably not be able to escape today. Fan Xian did not look at them. He only tilted his head slightly and listened to Dan Da's report. When he learned that the 3rd workshop was as usual and that the technicians of the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council had all taken over and no one dared to take advantage of the chaos to do anything, he finally relaxed. At this moment, a tiger guard who was supposed to be stationed in the manor quietly moved past the officials and came to Fan Xian's side. Moving close to his ear, he said, "The person in the manor wants to go out for a walk." The reason the 3rd workshop was important was because it was responsible for producing important items such as military equipment and ships. If the secrets of that place were leaked, who knew how many more young people in the Qing kingdom would die on the battlefield in the future? Fan Xian did not dare to take this responsibility. Originally, he had felt slightly more at ease listening to Dan Da's report. However, after hearing the Tiger Guard's report, his brows furrowed again. Hai Tang had disguised herself as a serving girl to follow him. She could fool the officials and many people, but she could not fool Gao Da's eagle-like eyes. Although Fan Xian realized that he had made a big mistake, it was already too late to make up for it. Fortunately, the Chinian unit was watching in secret. The Tiger Guards did not release any information to the outside world. Only then did he feel slightly more at ease. He began to wonder again. However, now was not the time to deal with this matter. The person the Tiger Guard was referring to was Haitang. It looked like that village girl knew that there would be a commotion today and probably wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to do something. Fan Xian calmly said, "Don't go out. Keep an eye on her. Use all methods to keep her in the manor today." 7 Tiger Guards against Haitang was the standard arrangement on the meadow last year. Fan Xian was not worried about anything. Furthermore, once military force met, Haitang knew his determination and would calm down. After dealing with his own matters, Fan Xian turned his gaze back to the scene and said, "Tie up these 2 criminals who instigated trouble and fought against the court." Soldiers had long gone forward to tie up the 2 masters. Although the treasurers' faces were filled with fear and hatred, no one dared to go forward to help. For one, there was the violent machine in front of them. For another, these treasurers had earned their fill of silver these years and truly did not have the courage to fight ruthlessly. The more money a person had, the more cowardly they were. Fan Xian saw this matter very clearly. "Sir Fan." The 2 masters did not resist. Somewhat numbly, they allowed the soldiers to tie up their hands. However, the second master continued to stare faintly at Fan Xian's face. "If you want to kill me, then kill me. But how will you explain this to the court in the future? Are you threatening me?" Fan Xian smiled. "On the way here, I once said something, if Butcher Zhang is dead, do I have to eat furred pigs? Without you little treasurers, do you think I won't be able to take care of the palace treasury?" The second master laughed wretchedly and said, "Is that so? We have indeed underestimated the imperial envoy's determination, but you also seem to have underestimated these unremarkable workshops." His last words were practically shouted out. It was clear he had already lost all hope, but he also had the ruthless thought of seeing how Fan Xian would destroy the palace treasury even if he became a ghost. Fan Xian glanced at Su Wenmao. Su Wenmao took out another file from his robe. With a serious face, he began to read out the names one by one according to the names written on the paper. Zhang San, Li Si, Wang Ba, Long Jiu. Following the names of these minor characters being read out one by one, the faces of the dozen people in the group of treasurers immediately became deathly white. They didn't know if they were about to be beheaded like Master Shao of the first workshop. A few of the more timid ones' legs trembled, and a large patch of their pants became wet. Su Wenmao glanced at these people with disgust. He didn't understand why the commissioner was doing this. After swallowing, he said with a dark expression, "You can come out now. The imperial envoy has pardoned you of no crime. Tomorrow, he will write to the court to vouch for you. Not guilty?" He still had to write to the court. The treasurers who had been called out were immediately dumbfounded. They had thought it was hell. Who knew that it was heaven with cool spring water and 72 virgins? Under the puzzled, suspicious, and jealous gazes of the treasurers around them, these dozen treasurers walked out of the crowd stupidly. They walked in front of Fan Xian and knelt down with a thud, thanking the imperial envoy, but they didn't understand why it was like this. Fan Xian's face was filled with a warm smile. His 2 hands lifted the treasurers up. As he acted, he said in an even voice, "To be able to capture the true crimes of the 3 masters and know that there were so many illegal things among the treasurers, it is all because you placed righteousness above family and were wholeheartedly loyal to the court. Otherwise, would not have known that the palace treasury would be in such a mess, nor would I have known that there were people who dared to incite a strike and make trouble. You have all done a service to the country, so I will not mistreat you." The marketplace was immediately in an uproar. So these dozen treasurers were spies. Even the officials behind Fan Xian were dumbfounded. They thought to themselves, the imperial envoy had only been in the palace treasury for 3 days, how could he have developed so many spies? The reputation of being a secret agent of the Overwatch Council was indeed not false. The treasurers knew that the dozen colleagues Fan Xian had asked to leave had secretly betrayed them. They couldn't help but fly into a rage. Although they didn't go forward to beat them, they began to curse them viciously. Filthy words flew through the air and burrowed into the ears of the spies. Where were the spies and treasurers? They had originally loved Sir Fan Jr. to death, but now they hated him to death. Yes, they had secretly returned the treasury silver and secretly said a few things they had heard, but it was not as serious as Sir Fan Jr. had said. They had only learned about the strike last night. Where would they have had the time to report it? As for Master Xiao and the other 2 masters, God, they just wanted to be a pretty fence-sitter. How would they dare offend the head of the treasurers? These treasurers, who had been condemned by thousands of people, looked at each other. They wanted to cry but had no tears. Even if Fan Xian let them go today, he had publicly pointed out their shameless and betrayal in front of everyone. How could they face their 200 colleagues in the future? How could they face others? Zhang San looked at Li Si. Wang Ba looked at Long Jiu. With sorrowful eyes, they asked, "You're also a spy?" "Yes, we're also a spy." What Fan Xian said next shocked the people in the workshop. These 13 treasurers bravely exposed the abuses and have done the country a service. I have decided that from now on, they will be the deputy masters of the 3 workshops. Fan Xian smiled warmly and asked the deputy beside him, "Sir Ma, what do you think of this proposal?" Deputy Ma Jia was still worried about how the palace treasury could produce normally and felt depressed. However, hearing these words, he still repeatedly nodded his head in agreement. In the depths of his heart, he felt great admiration for Fan Xian. This move was truly beautiful. Exposing the shameless faces of the spies of the treasurers. In the future, when the treasury was governed, these people would be used as claws and teeth. There was no need to worry that they would not be convinced. This was an artificial chasm drawn out among the treasurers. If today's matter could be concluded satisfactorily, it would be difficult for the treasurers in the future to come together again and become a class that could oppose the officials. Suddenly, someone laughed coldly. Everyone focused their eyes and saw it was the 2nd workshop treasurer who was tied up and kneeling on the ground. They saw him laugh coldly and sorrowfully. What a group of shameless people. Sir Fan, do you think you can rely on these people to keep the palace treasury running like before? I'm not threatening the court, but without the things in our heads, the palace treasury probably won't last more than a few days. After these words were said, the atmosphere became strange again. Deputy Ma Jia wanted to move closer to Fan Xian's ear to plead for mercy, but he didn't know how to say it. The trusted aides of Xinyang among the officials of the transport company also began to openly think for the court while secretly cheering for the master. They all advised Fan Xian that everything should be done for the sake of the palace treasury's production. Killing this Master Xiao was already enough of a lesson for the other party. Fan Xian would not listen to these words. He only stared at the 2nd workshop master and didn't speak for a moment. That pair of sharp and clear eyes stared at the 2nd workshop master until he could no longer bear it and slowly lowered his head. At this moment, Fan Xian said angrily, "You're at death's door, and you still dare to threaten the court, treasurers? I'll tear off your underwear and put it on your face to see if what grows on your neck is a head or a butt." The imperial envoy's thunderous anger made the workshop fall into absolute silence. Fan Xian swept his gaze across the treasurers and said with pity and anger in his disdain, "Do you really think you're so promising? Do you think the palace treasury is still the Yi family of the past? Don't you look at your little bit of ability and say other people are shameless people? What about you? Other than being greedy for silver, stealing materials to sell, embezzling hard-earned wages, and forcefully taking other people's wives, what else can you do? Shameless? If you were shameless, there wouldn't be today's matter. He turned and said angrily to the second workshop master, "You're very stubborn. The palace treasury can't do without you? Then tell me, how come the glass has become more and more muddy these years? How come the wine is so bland that it's about to give birth to a bird? The perfume has already stopped production for 10 years. Have you found a way yet? Back then, you were also a servant of the Yi family, old man." Fan Xian's heart was pained and he opened his mouth to curse at the master. "How did you King fall to this level? I'm about to King die of anger." Everyone in the workshop shivered. Only now did the slow-witted people remember that there seemed to be a rumor. The angry imperial envoy in front of them was a descendant of the Yi family. King me? Whose mother would be angry? There is something I need to explain. Yesterday's chapter finished very comfortably. I thought to myself that no one would say the plot stopped halfway. In the end, there were still brothers and sisters who seriously criticized me. It is very difficult for me to be happy. Originally, yesterday's chapter should have ended when the deputy called for the palace treasury to go on strike. Furthermore, I was also very tired. However, I thought that being stuck halfway probably made everyone uncomfortable, so I wrote another 1,000 words. I thought about it, so I wrote another 1,000 words. The plot developed naturally, but there was a limit to how many words I could write each day. It was not purposely left there. Please understand, bravo, thinking about it from another perspective, it meant that the current plot was rather attractive. I comforted myself. Of course, this paragraph does not count. Oh right, my spirit is a little weak. I'll report this first. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com, there are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 353. The master knelt on the ground. His face was red and white. Hearing the words, Yi family, he remembered the true identity of the person in front of him. A sliver of memory that had been hidden for many years slowly rose. It made him feel ashamed, angry, and afraid. The feeling of shame was easy to understand. After all, back then, he was just a little beggar by the side of the road. To be able to get to where he was now, it was all because of the Yi family. How had the young lady of the Yi family educated people like him? As for the anger and fear, it came from his natural reaction. It was a kind of shame and anger after being stripped naked. Thinking that the imperial envoy was a descendant of the Yi family, he was afraid that whatever he knew in his head, the other party would also know. Then, how could he use those things to threaten the other party? The other party had cut down Master Shao with one strike. Could he not cut him? The court has treated you well. Fan Xian looked at him and said each word clearly. Fan Xian looked at him and said each word clearly, putting aside you three masters, even a normal treasurer's annual salary is even more than a third-level official in Jingdo. What are you not satisfied with? A glimmer of coldness flashed through his eyes. Do you think that the production of the palace treasury all depends on your heads? That the 20 million liang of silver every year blinds your eyes and makes you feel dissatisfied and that you should earn more? These words hit the bottom of the treasurer's hearts. The palace treasury's annual production was abundant and sold to various countries under heaven. It brought the Qing kingdom a great profit. Although the treasurer's treatment was already very high, compared to that enormous sum of silver, they still felt uncomfortable in their hearts. They always felt that they earned money for the court and should be given more. This was why they privately took bribes, bent the law, and oppressed the common people. Hearing the imperial envoy say this, although the treasurers did not talk back, the meaning appeared in their eyes. Fan Xian laughed coldly and ruthlessly tore away their masks. Lightly mocking, he said, "The problem is, the things you rely on, are they really the things in your heads?" There was a silence. Everyone, including the officials, acknowledged this reality until Fan Xian said, "Don't forget, before the Yi family appeared, what did you know? Did the technology in your heads fall from heaven? Was it taught by the temple?" Fan Xian scolded, "All of you remember it clearly. This is what the Yi family taught you. Without the young lady of the Yi family, you are just trash, continuing to dig the fields and beg. Why did the Yi family build these workshops in the past? I think all of you have forgotten that you are in front of this official. You still want to use the things that the Yi family taught you to threaten this official. Do you have any shame? Do you have any shame?" The officials behind him looked at each other. Although the court had long stopped pursuing the matter of the Yi family and Sir Fan Jr.'s past was gradually known to the people of the world, to speak of the Yi family so openly was still somewhat taboo. Fan Xian could not care so much. He was angry, but he wanted to use this opportunity to clear his name. In this world, no matter what you did, you had to be justified. Fan Xian had scolded the treasurers and beheaded them. Disregarding the benefits, he had first taken the flag on a moral level. The manager of the second workshop finally softened. He knelt on the ground and wailed, "Milord, this lowly one knows his mistake. Please, milord, give this lowly one a chance. Let this lowly one use the skills I learned in the past to serve the court." Although this master was wailing in pain, Fan Xian's sharp eyes did not find any traces of tears on his face. On the contrary, the corners of his lips were pressed tightly together. He couldn't help but smile coldly. He knew that the others still thought he wouldn't continue killing and that the things in his head were still useful. Fan Xian gently clapped his hands. When the clapping was about to end, 4 old men around 50 years old were escorted into the workshop by Overwatch Council officials. These old men were not bystanders. They were the shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall who had come back from the Central Plain via Danzhou. The Overwatch Council officials set out 4 chairs. Fan Xian rose and, expressionless but deliberately respectful, invited the 4 shopkeepers to sit. The officials, treasurers, and workers were all confused. They wondered who these old men who seemed like they would be blown over by the slightest breeze had the right to sit side by side with the imperial envoy. Although the deputy, Ma Jie, didn't say anything, he was muttering in his heart. He thought, "Even I am standing behind the imperial envoy, how dare these commoners?" Fan Xian's finger slid across the robe on his body and dipped into some icy rainwater. He smeared it between his brows and slowly rubbed it. He asked, "Do you still recognize who these 4 are?" Nearly 20 years had passed since the Yi family's collapse. The workers in the palace treasury workshop were no longer the same as before. Even the treasurers had never seen the high and mighty 23 head shopkeepers of the Yi family, so they did not recognize who these 4 people were. Even though there were old men from back then, they were too far away and could not distinguish clearly. On the other hand, the second workshop's manager, who was kneeling on the ground, slowly swept his hesitant gaze across the 4 people's faces. He lowered his head and thought for a long while. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and was so shocked that his legs gave way. His originally kneeling posture, he immediately sat down on the muddy water. It had been 20 years since they had seen each other. As a small helper of the Yi family, it took him a long time to remember who the people sitting in front of him were, the old shopkeepers of the Yi family. The second workshop master's body began to tremble. Only now did he know why Fan Xian was so fearless, why he had forced him, the treasurers, to rebel, and why he did not care about what they remembered in their minds. He had brought the old shopkeepers, who had been under house arrest in Jingdou, to the palace treasury. What kind of people were the old shopkeepers? They were the first group of students of the young lady of the Yi family. They were also the masters of all the teachers and helpers of the Yi family. They were also the ancestors of the present palace treasury treasurers. With such a group of old men at his side, the imperial envoy did not care about the problem of lost craftsmanship, nor did he have to worry about the quality of the palace treasury's products. Truthfully speaking, the palace treasury had been single-handedly built by these old shopkeepers. How could they not be managed? Thinking this through, the master's face was full of despair, but there was still a glimmer of hope in the depths of his heart. Opening his mouth, he struggled to crawl toward Fan Xian and wailed, "Teacher, please ask for leniency on behalf of your disciple." Everyone was startled, and Fan Xian was also slightly surprised. He knew that this person was not asking for leniency from him. Following the master's gaze, he found that he was looking at Seventh Yi. He couldn't help tilting his head and asking curiously, "Seventh Yi, was he your former disciple?" Seventh Yi's face darkened. He stared at the master's face and said in a raspy voice full of resentment, "He learned from me for a few days." Fan Xian smiled slightly. He understood Seventh Yi's feelings. After the Yi family collapsed, the 23 old shopkeepers had been captured by the court from various places and placed under house arrest in Jingdo. Some of their disciples had resisted and died, while others struggled at death's door. Of course, this was all people's own choice in the face of impending disaster. No one blamed them. However, for someone like the second master who had climbed to such a high position, his behavior back then must have been very bad. Hearing the second master call out, "Teacher," the third master, who had been standing silently to the side, froze to the side like he had been struck by lightning. Looking at the four old men sitting beside the imperial envoy, he completely couldn't believe his ears. The remaining members of the Yi family among the treasurers confirmed the identities of these four people. Amidst their shock, there were also some people who still had old memories. They all stood up and knelt in front of the four old shopkeepers with shock, joy, and fear. Fourth Master. Uncle 12th, I am Zhu Zi. Greetings, old shopkeepers. Back then, I was a worker in the Chuzhou branch doing odd jobs. Although most of the treasurers did not have much of a relationship with these four old shopkeepers, the palace treasury meeting to recognize relatives was already bustling with activity. Fan Xian's face darkened and he said in a cold voice, "I'll come back to recognize relatives in a bit." Although his expression was unhappy, his heart had calmed down. With the 13 spies as deputy masters and the remaining power of these old shopkeepers, his plan to reform the palace treasury should be able to proceed smoothly. Meeting again after 20 years, the atmosphere in the workshop immediately became somewhat sad. This kind of sadness perfectly diluted the earlier tension. Only the officials of the transport company felt uneasy, and some of the Xinjiang people laughed coldly to themselves. If the scene in front of them got back to Jingdo, the emperor would probably have some opinions about Commissioner Fan. The second master lowered his head and knelt on the ground. He also felt slightly comforted in his heart. Looking at this situation, at most he would receive some punishment. In a moment, he would desperately admit his mistake. For the sake of the old Yi family, the imperial envoy probably wouldn't make things too difficult for him. He glanced sideways at the body of Master Shao in the distance at the mouth of the furnace and felt a lingering fear in his heart. Fortunately, Shao Jing had stepped forward first. He also felt some sympathy for that bastard. He thought to himself that a person who had no connection to the old Yi family had indeed died cleanly under the hands of the imperial envoy. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian had repulsed the treasurers, a faint smile rose to his face and he said, "Take this person away and behead him." "Yes, sir." The second master raised his head and looked around with a perplexed gaze. For a moment, he didn't understand who to behead. Shouldn't things be like this? It was not until he was dragged up by the Overwatch Council officials that he realized the imperial envoy still wanted to kill him. He had wanted to open his mouth to cry out for his innocence, but a clump of dirt blocked his mouth. Seeing the Overwatch Council officials drag the limp master out of the workshop and the water stain on the ground, everyone in the workshop, regardless of whether they were officials or commoners, shopkeepers or treasurers, became deathly silent. They all turned their gazes toward the imperial envoy sitting in the middle. It was as if Fan Xian could not feel the countless gazes and lowered his head slightly. Outside the workshop came the muffled sound of a metal weapon striking a neck, as well as a muffled grunt. There was an uproar in the workshop and immediately sank into a death-like silence. Everyone knew that the second master had died so simply. The silence did not last long. The third master, with his hands tied behind his back, smiled self-mockingly. His face was pale with despair. Very consciously, he walked in front of Fan Xian. He knew that he had no chance of survival. Since the imperial envoy had used the name of suppressing the strike, then he would not be stupid enough to open a court to investigate the case. He also did not need any evidence. He had to kill the three of them on the spot to establish his might. Only then could the four old shopkeepers regain control of the palace treasury technicians. Two of the masters of the three workshops had already died, so he was the third. Fan Xian glanced at him and furrowed his brows slightly. The third master looked at him and gritted his teeth for a moment. He then suddenly said, "I have my own path to death. I don't blame you for digging this pit for me to jump into. However, before I die, I beg you to allow me to ask something." Fan Xian raised his brows and said, "Ask." The third master no longer looked at him. He tilted his head and gazed at the Yi family's 12th shopkeeper beside him. His lips trembled for a while before he said in a trembling voice, "12th uncle, my teacher, is he well in the capital? I am unfilial and have not been filial these years." "You are?" 12th Yi blinked his slightly muddy eyes and asked this master with confusion. 7th Yi sighed and said from the side, 13th's eldest disciple. "Back then, you had the best relationship with 12th, so he came to ask you." 12th Yi said in shock, "Hu Jinlin? You're still alive? We all thought you died back then." The old shopkeeper suddenly remembered that he was surrounded by court officials. His words were not quite right, so he quickly shut his mouth. Hu Jinlin's face was full of shame. He lowered his head and refused to speak. 12th Yi sighed and said, "The young lady once said that living is better than dying. Us old bones are all struggling at death's door, how can we blame you? Only you asked 13th, ah." The shopkeeper shook his head and said, "He already passed away a few years ago. Of the 23 people who entered the capital, there are only 15 left now." Hearing that his teacher had passed away, Hu Jinlin completely forgot that he was about to die as well. A great sorrow appeared on his face. Fan Xian listened quietly to the side. Fan Xian listened quietly to the side. He also felt a strange emotion in his heart. The elders of the Yi family were gradually being battered by the wind and rain. The year he first entered Jingdo, there were 23 shopkeepers and 17 people. In less than 2 years, another 2 had died. He looked at the materials piled around the workshop and abruptly became distracted. He thought to himself that time flowed like water. When would he be able to rebuild the name of the Yi family? When would he be able to have the people who should die die and have the people who should live live again in the hearts of the Qing people? In a very short time, he had already woken up. Looking at the third master in front of him, he said mockingly, "Although I don't know if you are acting or if you really still have feelings for me, I never planned on killing you. So don't think that you can live because I'm soft-hearted." Hu Jinlin, who thought he was going to die, had no hope of getting lucky after the tragic deaths of his 2 masters. Suddenly hearing these words, on the contrary, he was so shocked he didn't know what to say. Fan Xian said expressionlessly, "Those who are guilty are beheaded, and those who have committed minor crimes are forgiven. I'm not here to settle old grudges." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 354. The reason Fan Xian did not kill Hu Jinlin was very simple. The third workshop had always been jointly managed by the palace treasury and the third bureau of the Overwatch Council. They were specifically responsible for the research of military equipment and ships. The third bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been Fan Xian's fellow disciples, so they understood the situation of the third workshop the best. Hu Jinlin was wholeheartedly engrossed in studying the blueprints the mistress of the Yi family had left behind. His personality was wooden and dull. Although he had embezzled a great deal of silver, he had never done something that Fan Xian could not tolerate, such as taking over fields and bullying women. Compared to the masters of the first and second workshops, there was indeed a reason for him not to be killed. Of course, the most important reason was that Fan Xian did not want to kill him. From another angle, it showed that he was not a righteous official. The master of the third workshop was taken away. There were still many treasures left in the workshop. These people looked at each other. At the beginning of the strike, everyone was secretly anxious in their hearts, but they still had some confidence. It was not the first time the treasurers had banded together to oppose the officials of the court's transport company. In the past, as long as their requests were not excessive, the matter would always be resolved peacefully. In their eyes, they only wanted to protect the silver they had extorted and harshly withheld over these years. It was indeed a reasonable request. However, no one had thought that the new imperial envoy would be so vicious and merciless. After pointing out the nature of the palace treasury and inviting out the 4 old Yi family shopkeepers, the treasurers all knew that all of their trump cards had lost all effect in front of this young official. At this moment, the treasurers were just a flock of chickens waiting to be slaughtered. It was just a matter of how many Fan Xian wanted to slaughter. Not many. Following Su Wenmao's naming and statement of crimes, another 3 treasurers were pulled out from the crowd. These 3 treasurers had done many evil things and secretly colluded with the officials of the Suzhou government. The matters they had handled had violated countless Qing laws. Killing them 16 or 17 times was not enough. Fan Xian accepted the file in Su Wenmao's hands and glanced at the treasurers in front of him who had wet his pants and couldn't even stand steadily. He furrowed his brows and said, "You're the one who married 12 concubines?" The treasurers didn't even have the strength to nod. He was terrified. Fan Xian shook his head and mockingly said, "Marrying 12 concubines only shows that you are rich and have a lot of confidence in the bed between husband and wife. But out of the 12 concubines, 9 of them were taken by force. That is very shameful. Stealing someone's wife and killing their own husband? Impressive, impressive. You are even more arrogant than the most famous hedonistic playboy in the capital." Although the other 2 treasurers did not commit such a crime, they still deserved to die. Fan Xian waved his hand. The Overwatch Council officials dragged the 3 treasurers out. Following the sound of 3 knives and 3 wretched cries, 3 lives were lost. Killing people without a change in expression was something the Overwatch Council officials could do. Even the soldiers by the side of the workshop could barely do it. However, the officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company could not take it anymore. Their backs were drenched in sweat. Some of them smelled the blood inside and outside the workshop and wanted to vomit. Deputy Ma Jia was still relatively calm, but the sweat on his face began to drip furiously. Pitifully, he moved closer to Fan Xian's ear and said, "Sir, in a few days, the Palace Treasury will open for bidding. Killing people is inauspicious, killing people is inauspicious." Naturally, there was no way to save the people who had been killed, but Ma Jia was afraid that Fan Xian's vicious nature would explode and continue to kill. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Sir Ma, don't worry. 6 years ago, Ma Yu, the eldest princess personally came to the palace treasury for the last time. How many treasurers did she kill? He extended his thumb and pinky finger and said, 6. I am a junior, so naturally, I won't kill too many. I've already killed 5. That's enough. Hearing these 2 words, the hearts of the officials behind him relaxed involuntarily. The treasurers in front of them were wild with joy. Regardless of who it was, they were all frightened by the 5 bloody heads until their legs felt weak. Only Su Wenmao suppressed the displeasure in his heart after a moment of surprise and didn't say anything. Deputy Ma Jie furrowed his brows, thinking that there was more to the imperial envoy's words. The eldest princess had killed 6, and he had only killed 5. If this matter went wrong in the future and the imperial censors reported him for violating court law and killing indiscriminately, it looked like there would be an explanation. It seemed that although this imperial envoy was young, his thoughts were ruthlessly meticulous. He could not miss the path that his cousin, Ren Shaoan, had painstakingly paved for him. After thinking through this matter, Deputy Ma Jie solemnly agreed to Fan Xian's following appointments and measures without a trace of evasion or conflict. Although some of the officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company were unhappy, since the head and deputy had set the rules, they could not oppose it. In Fan Xian's plan, the masters of the 3 large workshops were either dead or imprisoned. It just so happened to free up the 3 most important positions for the 3 old Yi family shopkeepers to temporarily hold. Additionally, the traitor treasurers, who had reported their colleagues' crimes to the Overwatch Council, would take on the positions as assistants. It could be considered making up for the old shopkeepers' lack of familiarity with the palace treasury after not returning for 20 years. Killing first and planting spies among them. With these arrangements, the entire group of treasurers could be considered stabilized. In the future, the traitor treasurers only had to guard against the treasurers below them feeling discontent and purposely picking on their mistakes. When they did things, they had to be particularly careful. Once the group stood, these deputy masters would be particularly vicious and stare at the subordinate treasurers. The 2 clashed, presumably, the things that Fan Xian did not want to see would gradually decrease. 3-day order, there's still half a day, Fan Xian said. Don't look at me, I know you can all read. Go back. Some of the workshops that you should be in are hundreds of li away. If you don't hurry home to raise the money and then return to the workshop to work, are you going to continue standing here like clay figurines? Fan Xian said, those who didn't die, spit out the silver and give me a clear account of what you have done. Write a note yourself. His voice gradually became cold at the end. After saying this, he walked out of the large workshop under the terrified gazes of the treasurers. The soldiers General Yi led gradually dispersed. The Overwatch Council officials all returned to their positions. It was still unknown who the spies placed in the workshops were. The officials whispered among themselves, but no one knew what they were talking about. The workers had watched a great show. After the treasurers had been taught a lesson through blood and fire, they became particularly obedient and terrified. The heavy rain outside gradually stopped. A lively palace treasury strike incident ended in such an absurd and nonsensical manner under Fan Xian's knife and the shopkeepers' old faces. The treasurers and officials returned the silver smoothly. After Fan Xian had examined them one by one, he also gently raised his noble hand. As long as they did not hide it too far, he left them some face and did not squeeze everyone dry of their family property. Being an official was only for money. If they were all swept clean, the officials of the palace treasury would not be able to show it on the surface, but they would certainly have a great knot in their hearts. When they did things, they would be incomparably lazy. Even with all 5 fingers spread open and pulling at the silver, the Yaman's 3-day order still recovered a large amount of silver. Even though Fan Xian's family was extremely wealthy and he had seen a lot of things in this life, looking at the number on the account, he still sucked in a cold breath in shock. He felt a faint regret in his heart. This matter had become a big deal. It was impossible to hide it from Jingdo. Under the eyes of everyone, the silver that was cleared, other than the wages owed to the workers these years, had to be sent into the palace treasury's special accounts. It was impossible for him to move it personally. If he had known earlier that the treasurers were the fattest corrupt officials in the world, perhaps Fan Xian would not have organized such a purge. Instead, he would have directly had the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council be thieves. Other than things like land deeds, he would have stolen the rest of the banknotes into his own private hands. He was currently short of silver. If he could have this large sum of silver, he would no longer need the help of the North, and it would prevent new problems from arising in the process. More importantly, it would also allow his father to stay out of the matter, so that he would not be implicated in the future bidding. Returning to Haitang, after that day of the strike, Fan Xian returned to the manor and bitterly complained to this girl. Other than righteousness, he analyzed the current situation in detail and warned her that the Qing emperor probably already knew that the two of them were together. If she dared to go peep in the workshops in front of the tiger guards, he probably wouldn't be able to sit in his position in the palace treasury for more than 2 days. If he couldn't stay in the palace treasury, how much more silver would Northern Qi have to fork out in a year? Haitang was a bit innocent. She thought that she was just bored, so she wanted to go for a walk. How did it involve some conspiracy? Fan Xian was a bit suspicious. On the surface, he didn't bring up the matter again, but in his heart, he was still a bit uncomfortable. Fortunately, the palace treasury affairs were gradually moving on the right track. This process only needed a few days. It had to be said that Fan Xian's cold-faced killing during the strike had deeply intimidated everyone. Furthermore, the old shopkeeper's reappearance and Fan Xian's clever arrangements had all played a large role. The workers once again received the wages they had worked for many years. The girls who had been forcefully taken also returned to their homes. The entire palace treasury floor was filled with an atmosphere of joy. Amidst the joyous atmosphere, there were also some discordant notes mixed in. Although Fan Xian's thoughts were meticulous and had long guessed some of it, he had used the power of the government ahead of time to suppress those bitter stories from happening. The Qing kingdom's common people's own stories were always complicated. The common people did not like those women, but they were used to living happy lives with the little treasurer. Once the situation changed, they were not used to it. The treasurers did not have sex in the middle of the night, so there were not many cases of forcefully taking concubines. Although there were not many cases, it involved matters between men and women. It created a bad influence among the people. Fan Xian was vexed, but he didn't have any good ideas. It was difficult for an upright official to resolve family matters. He, a ruthless official, was also not that strong, so he could only toss it aside. However, these were just small interludes. On a larger level, the authority of the new head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, Imperial Envoy Fan Xian, had already been established. Furthermore, in the hearts of the tens of thousands of low-level workers in the Palace Treasury, he had firmly forged an image of being upright and outspoken, incorruptible, and wise. Presently, he no longer needed the help of the 8th Bureau. With his reputation as a civil and military official, Fan Xian had long become familiar with these methods. The palace treasury gradually calmed down. However, the strike had ended, but Fan Xian's plan had only just begun. To beat the snake to scare it, one half of the two-headed snake had been ruthlessly killed by him. With the other injured, it was time to begin moving. "Is there any new news from Ziyue?" Fan Xian asked casually as he sat in a chair and looked with narrowed eyes at today's council reports. Su Wenmao replied, "Not so fast. According to your orders, even if those Xinyang officials send the news out, it will take at least a month for them to come and go." Fan Xian sighed. The imperial censors in the court do things too slowly. Su Wenmao smiled bitterly, thinking, How could there be someone like the commissioner in the world who waited for the imperial censors to come and report him? It was only because his background was strong enough that he could sit so calmly. We can't wait anymore. Tomorrow, we'll capture those people, Fan Xian said. The target of these words was, of course, the trusted officials Xinyang had left in the palace treasury. At the beginning of the 3-day order, these officials had secretly stirred up the emotions of the treasurers and incited them to oppose Fan Xian. After Fan Xian demonstrated his bloody methods, these officials were as happy as if they had eaten a sweet jujube. Throughout the night, they thought of ways to send out memorials without asking. Of course, it was to report to the officials of the eldest princess faction in Jingdo. At the beginning, Fan Xian had allowed the treasurers to link up for 3 days and finally form a strike to force the emperor to abdicate. It was for the sake of making the pustules in the palace treasury grow more plentiful and to see who was playing tricks. Before and after, the Overwatch Council's secret agents watched the many officials in the transport company with great caution. These people had no way of escaping the net Fan Xian had laid out. "Let's do it," Fan Xian said with a pained smile. "We're all leaving. We can't keep them here to eat porridge." Su Wenmao made a sound of acknowledgement and asked with confusion, "Sir, why didn't you cover up the news at the beginning? After all, there was a strike this time. Once the court in Jingdo discussed it, if Xinyang did something else, I'm afraid your days would not be easy." Fan Xian fell silent. His fingers gently tapped against the armrest of the chair. This was a very common behavior when he was thinking about a problem. After thinking for a while, he decided to explain a bit more to his trusted aide. He raised his head and explained, "The palace treasury is divided into 2 parts. The workshops are the foundation, and the export merchants are the hands and feet. If I want to break someone's hands and feet, I have to first lay down a solid foundation. I have never been used to planning for a situation that takes too long, so I chose to force these people in the palace treasury to overreact first. Only then can I strike heavily and find an excuse to chase the Xinyang officials out." Su Wenmao nodded, but he thought that this could not explain his earlier question. Looking at the commissioner's expression, he knew he had a sense of propriety, so he listened patiently. "I want to force the enemies in the palace treasury to act," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. "Isn't the eldest princess also waiting for me to force her? Given her eyes in the court and palace, how could she not know that the old shopkeepers had followed me to Jiangnan? And she has never told this matter to the officials in the palace. It is clear that she does not want those officials to know my bottom line and not dare to stand out bravely. Think about it, if everyone knew that the old shopkeepers were with us, how could this strike have happened? Naturally, it would not have happened." Su Wenmao furrowed his brows. "If they knew that you had old teachers from Qingyu Hall at your side, those treasurers would not have dared to stand out and make irresponsible remarks. But the question is, why would the eldest princess hide this information and wait for the palace treasury officials to secretly make connections, thus giving you a good opportunity to establish your might? If she had explained it clearly beforehand, the treasurers would certainly have been much more well-behaved. Those Xinyang officials would have also calmed down and not let us find any reason to do so." Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. "This eldest princess stands much higher than most people. Yes, it looks like she has given me a chance to establish my might and even allowed me to intimidate a group of officials in the palace treasury. However, in the way I handled this matter, I had no choice but to borrow more of the people and power of the old Yi family. I had to kill people to establish my might. My methods would appear more violent and unscrupulous." He continued to explain, "When I first entered the palace treasury, I killed 5 treasurers. If this news got to Jingdo, the court would certainly not have a good evaluation of me. As for using the old shopkeepers to control the palace treasury, it would touch on some people's taboos in the palace. The eldest princess covered this pot of porridge and waited for it to boil. It looked like she wanted me to eat it, but in reality, she wanted to burn my mouth. Su Wenmao worriedly said, speaking of which, when you handled the strike that day, your words seemed to touch on some taboos. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. Su Wenmao's face was full of seriousness. After the strike, killing people, and the old shopkeepers get back to Jingdo, no matter what, the court will reprimand you. At the very least, your actions are reckless and careless, unbearable. He closed his mouth, but Fan Xian smiled and continued, unbearable? At the very worst, they could secretly say that I have different aspirations and still remember the Yi family in the past, and so on. Su Wenmao paused and immediately understood what Commissioner Fan feared the most in his life. He involuntarily sucked in a breath of cold air. Only now did he finally feel the eldest princess' methods. She had not done anything. She had only secretly helped Fan Xian hide the news of the old shopkeepers heading south. She had been able to place Fan Xian on the mouth of a very dangerous volcano. Since you understood the plan so well, back then, you should have brought out the old shopkeepers at the first opportunity. You should have been more cautious in your actions. He gathered his courage and admonished Fan Xian. Fan Xian shook his head and said, the eldest princess calculated that I had to intensify the conflict in order to take control of the palace treasury as quickly as possible. As for the aftermath, it is something I cannot care about right now. So, on this point, even if she watches coldly from Jingdo, I still have to do it. He smiled coldly and said, as for the trusted officials of the palace treasury being dug out by me because of this, presumably, she also knows that with the help of the Overwatch Council, these people will not be of any use in the next few years. On the contrary, they will bring her unwanted trouble. Since they are already useless people, why would she care about their life or death? They are just a few abandoned chess pieces to give me some trouble before they die. Since no matter what she does, it is impossible to stop my complete takeover. Of course, the eldest princess is willing to see that my takeover will cause some trouble and bring me some hidden worries in the future. The so-called hidden worries in these words were naturally the noble's understanding of Fan Xian. Perhaps there would be some subtle changes because of the palace treasury matter. Who knew if the cold-blooded side Fan Xian showed in handling the palace treasury matter would touch the Empress Dowager's sensitive nerve or make the Empress and the Crown Prince think of the Yi family in the past. Making connections was like a venomous snake that ate at one's heart and soul. Before Fan Xian had enough power to deal with them, perhaps they would become wary. The Empress Dowager, the eldest princess, and the Empress were a group of women in the harem. The Crown Prince and the second prince were a pair of quarrelsome lovers. If they once again united because of Fan Xian's existence, and if the emperor would have some kind of suspicion toward Fan Xian, the eldest princess would laugh. The eldest princess should laugh, and Fan Xian should cry. In the palace treasury matter, the so-called, with the shopkeeper in hand, I have the world. The eldest princess had to accept this reality, so she only wanted to obtain some benefits from it. What should I do next? Fan Xian lowered his head and said faintly and insipidly, nothing much. According to the director's words, the eldest princess's vision is still limited to one palace. If the imperial censorate really accuses me this time, I'm afraid she will suffer a loss. Su Wenmao looked at him with disbelief. Fan Xian raised his head and a confident smile rose to his face. Since the emperor has given the old shopkeeper to me, it means that, in a short amount of time, he believes in my loyalty. If I go to Jiangnan to take over the palace treasury, it will damage the eldest princess's face. If the eldest princess maintains her silence at this time, then it's fine. If I do anything wrong in cleaning up the palace treasury, the Jingdo court officials will rise up and attack me. The emperor can't help but be suspicious. As for the problem of the old Yi family, it won't affect me too much. I want this pot of porridge in the palace treasury to be cooked quickly. The eldest princess likes me to use a fierce fire, but I hope she will secretly help me use a fierce fire. Fan Xian smiled and said, although my actions in the palace treasury are impudent and worthy of suspicion, I did not purposely hide it. Naturally, the emperor believes in my sincerity. Although the eldest princess looks on coldly from the side, she is scheming without authorization. This is the so-called insincerity. He finally explained, any scheme, at the final stage, only depends on the emperor's mood and closeness. I have always been completely honest with the emperor. He didn't know if these words were to convince Su Wan-mao or to deceive him. In this battle, Fan Xian knew that his son-in-law had to obtain victory. As his son, he also had to obtain victory. After the emperor had established the second prince as an enemy for the crown prince, he had now successfully established Fan Xian as the most valiant whetstone. The eldest princess only saw the pressure Fan Xian's rise brought to the two princes and the Empress Dowager and Empress in the palace. She did not see clearly that this kind of pressure was secretly cultivated by the Qing emperor. This was what Fan Xian had said earlier through Chen Pingping's mouth. The eldest princess's vision was still limited. It was not the limitations of history, but the limitations of her but. After all, she was not an emperor who sat on the dragon chair and looked down on the world. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 355. It was the middle of March. Spring had long swept across the world from the north to the south. Regardless of whether it was Shangjing in the north or Jingdo in the Qing kingdom, they were all enveloped in a flourishing scene. In the land of Jiangnan, the green water rippled and the green mountains hid each other. Along the river, the willow trees sprouted tender green branches and wrote the word vitality. The palace treasury was southwest of Jiangnan Road, so it could not escape the good fortune of nature. In just a few days, up and down the river, inside and outside the workshops, green grass and light pink flowers grew, decorating the originally dull yamen and workshops. It greatly weakened the hard and cold atmosphere. Amidst the peace, the officials who came to the yamen for work had faces full of smiles and raised their hands in greeting at the yamen door. The rain of blood and foul wind had already passed. Tomorrow, the imperial envoy would return to Suzhou to preside over the matter of the palace treasury opening for the new year. The mood of these officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company was very relaxed. After opening the yamen to discuss matters, Fan Xian sat in the middle seat and gave a brief summary of the future arrangements. However, there were no trusted aides among these people, so what he talked about was the usual routine, such as the arrangements for the various workshops. Other than reiterating the Qing laws, he also mentioned that the court had specially revised the rules for the palace treasury. They could not be disobeyed. Regardless of whether it was wages or salaries, they all had to be distributed promptly. The daily security and security work also had to be more vigilant. Hearing the imperial envoy say this, the officials also agreed. With those 5 heads in front of them, no one would be stupid enough to contradict him face to face. Fan Xian arranged for Su Wan-mao to stay. However, he did not have an official position in the transport company, so he temporarily moved his subordinates to the 4th Bureau. Together with Dan De, he led the Overwatch Council officials and secret agents in the palace treasury. The officials knew that after Fan Xian finished presiding over the New Year opening of the palace treasury in Suzhou, he would go to Hangzhou to settle down. This was a rule that had been established many years ago. The head of the transport company would not live in the palace treasury. Thus, Su Wan-mao, who stayed in the palace treasury, was equivalent to the imperial envoy's spokesperson. He could not be treated lightly. Thus, everyone quickly stood and greeted Su Wan-mao. As they met, Fan Xian's brows furrowed slightly. He quietly said to the deputy beside him, "Ma Jie, I am going to do what we talked about last night." This was a superficial respect for the deputy envoy. Ma Jie, however, had a bitter expression on his face as he shook his head repeatedly. A strange light flashed through the eyes of General Yi, who was sitting to Fan Xian's right. He didn't know what the imperial envoy was up to this time that he hadn't been notified. His question was quickly answered. Su Wenmao put on a false smile and walked to the front of the hall. He raised his hands in salute to everyone present. After returning the greeting, he quietly said, "Today, we have investigated the matter of some officials in the Palace Treasury Transport Company secretly doing something improper. They incited the treasurers to cause trouble and shook the foundation of the palace treasury. Everyone, please excuse us." Following these words, 7 or 8 Overwatch Council officials walked out from the side of the yamen and rudely asked the officials who had been sitting in their chairs to leave their seats. They rudely removed their official hats. These officials flew into a rage. As they pushed and refused, they shouted, "How dare you!" Once the other officials of the transport company saw that they weren't targeting them, they felt slightly more at ease. However, they knew the methods of the Overwatch Council. The civil officials of the Qing court had a natural alliance in front of the Overwatch Council. They quickly stood and said to Fan Xian seriously, "Sir, what is the reason for this?" In reality, no one was an idiot. They all knew that the people Fan Xian was dealing with, other than Wu Sha, were all trusted aides that the eldest princess of Xinyang had placed in the palace treasury these past 10 years. The imperial envoy's actions were nothing more than to dig out the roots of the predecessors and then plant his own saplings in their place. However, this matter concerned the face of the officials. If the yamen was so fierce in arresting people, the officials would not be able to keep their faces. It was inevitable that they would argue with Fan Xian a little. Fan Xian glanced at the officials and warmly said, "Everyone, there is no need to be suspicious, but there is also no need to plead for leniency. I will definitely take down these officials." General Yi, who sat to his right, had an ugly expression. He glanced at Deputy Ma Jie beside him and found that although he could not hide his awkwardness, there was no shock in his eyes. Presumably, he had already been informed by Fan Xian last night. Thinking of this, General Ye's mood began to become heavy. In a muffled voice, he reported, "Sir, these officials have served in the transport company for a long time and have always restrained themselves to serve the public good. If we just take them like this, I'm afraid, it will not be justifiable." Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled. "Restrained themselves to serve the public good? I'm afraid it's not." General Ye's expression darkened slightly. "Even if there are occasional improprieties, you have already given the 3-day order. These officials have already acted according to your orders. Since it is clear that they will not be punished, they will not be punished." Fan Xian lowered his head. He knew why General Yi and the other officials had jumped out to oppose him today. The reason was actually very simple. Last time, when he suppressed the treasurer's strike, this general knew he could not stop Fan Xian's methods. Furthermore, the hat Fan Xian used to suppress him was large enough. The court could not afford to lose a single day of work in the palace treasury. Capturing these officials this time had touched on everyone's most sensitive psychological defenses. They were terrified that he, as the imperial envoy who also held the position of commissioner of the Overwatch Council, would use this as an excuse to weave a large net and flip over the entire transport company, injuring himself. For General Yi, his family had been pushed hard by the emperor. Additionally, with Yi Linger's relationship with the second prince, there were already faint signs of leaning in that direction. Although General Yi had never received any secret letters from the Yi family in Dingzhou, he knew that Fan Xian's capture today was to dig out all of the eldest princess trusted aides in the palace treasury. Unconsciously, he wanted to save something for the eldest princess. If he allowed Fan Xian to grow in the palace treasury, General Yi was worried that his future days would not be easy. Fan Xian did not explain anything. He only pulled out a file from his clothes and handed it to General Yi. General Yi was slightly surprised. He accepted the opened file and looked at it closely. His expression gradually darkened. He saw that on the file were all the shady and illegal activities of the officials who had been captured. Most importantly, the crime on it was not on the so-called corruption. Instead, it was on the dishonorable roles these officials had played in the labor unrest. All of the evidence, including the traitorous confessions of the treasurers, were clear. For example, when an official had spoken to which treasurers, the locations, and people were all clearly written. The attack was ruthless and accurate. It was truly the Overwatch Council's top-notch methods. Looking at each line of evidence on the file, this general's heart couldn't help but gradually grow cold. He thought that the imperial envoy had only been in the palace treasury for a few days. How could he have investigated all of the transport company's ins and outs so clearly? Furthermore, how did the people of the Overwatch Council know so clearly about the secret conversations between Xinyang's trusted aides and the treasurers? Could it be that there were Overwatch Council spies among the treasurers? Thinking of this, General Yi remembered the legendary terror of the Overwatch Council. Those spies, who had already been described by the people as being like poisonous snakes in the night, were everywhere. He involuntarily began to worry about himself. Would there also be Overwatch Council spies in his manor? However, as the general in charge of the palace treasury's defense, he was not very afraid of the Overwatch Council. First, he was a third-level official. The Overwatch Council did not have the power to arrest him without asking for an edict. Second, as a member of the military, regardless of faction, the Overwatch Council saw the power of the Qing Kingdom's military and had to give them some face. On the matter of the labor unrest, General Yi thought he had performed well enough. Today, it truly involved the eldest princess face, as well as the matter of the princes in Jingdo. He forcefully resisted the unease in his heart and stood. He bowed to Fan Xian and said sincerely, "Sir, this." After all, he was a general, so he didn't know how to organize his pleas. Fan Xian smiled and looked at him. He shook his head and said, "There's no need to plead." General Yi was terrified that Dingzhou was still not willing to send a message. He had no idea which side to stand on, which was why he had sunk into the difficult situation he was in. However, Fan Xian had acted first. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to say, "Sir, these people are all officials of the transport company. I wonder if you want to take them as the head of the transport company or as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council?" In a low voice, he said, "Sir, even if the imperial envoy takes people and the evidence is there, if you want to investigate the case, it will take many days to open the court. The palace treasury is about to open." Fan Xian glanced at him and was surprised by the other party's courage. After thinking for a moment, he understood. If he wanted to take these officials, the method he used was very particular. If he used his identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council to investigate the case, then once it got back to Jingdo, it would draw the court's attention. The elders in court would probably think he was targeting the eldest princess or something. If he used his identity as the head of the transport company or the imperial envoy to investigate the case, he could not delay this any longer. Who was Fan Xian? How could he care about the discussion in Jingdo? He smiled and said, "General Yi, don't worry too much. I have always believed in Qing law and will not act recklessly. Today, I have taken these officials. For the sake of fairness, I will not personally investigate the case." General Yi was slightly startled. As long as you don't personally investigate the case, no matter who investigates, it will depend on Jingdo's inclination. With Fan Xian's promise, he could answer to Jingdo, so he hesitantly retreated. However, he was curious as to why Fan Xian was not personally investigating the case. Was he going to lock these officials up in the palace treasury? They couldn't keep them locked up forever. The court would eventually send an inquiry. "I will take them with me on the road," Fan Xian said. The palace treasury is also a part of the court. Although it has never had much interaction with the officials in court, in terms of rules, it is still managed by Jiangnan Road. He gazed at the many uneasy officials in the hall and comfortingly said, I know what everyone is worried about. Don't worry, I am not a vengeful person. Just as I said to General Yi earlier, for the sake of fairness, I will not personally interrogate these people. Instead, I will hand them over to the governor of Suzhou. He smiled slightly and said, with Sir Shui investigating the case, presumably no one will have any more misgivings. He looked at the eldest princess trusted aide who was still confronting the Overwatch Council officials in the hall. A glimmer of anger flashed across the corner of his lips. When did catching people become a game of eagle catching chicks? Su Wenmao's face reddened slightly as he glared fiercely at his subordinates. The Overwatch Council officials felt ashamed in their hearts. They went forward and used a few Foshan shadowless kicks, kicking the palace treasury officials who were still crying out for injustice and refused to submit to the ground and tying them up. The officials in front of the hall couldn't help but shake their heads. They had wanted to persuade the imperial envoy to at least leave some face for the officials. Thinking of Fan Xian's earlier display of warmth and sternness, they were intimidated by that kind of warmth, coldness, and mood swings. They didn't dare to open their mouths and plead for mercy. As a subordinate, they were not afraid of their superior's cruelty. They were afraid of their superior's moods and not knowing when they would pull out that knife again. Fan Xian's last opening of the palace treasury yamen thus ended. After the hall dispersed, he asked Deputy Ma Jia to stay behind. The two of them sat in the garden behind the manor. As they got close to the scent of spring, they talked about some matters that carried the chill of autumn. Don't blame me for being too ruthless. Fan Xian rubbed the slightly dry corners of his eyes and said, since they dared to make a move at the beginning of my tenure, then don't blame me for taking down their black veil. Ma Jia smiled bitterly. Although in name, he and Fan Xian were deputy and it appeared that there was not much of a difference in rank, he knew that in reality, the power in the hands of the young master in front of him was shockingly great. It was even more terrifying than that of the princes. Thus, when Fan Xian had discussed with him last night about getting rid of the eldest princess trusted aides in the palace treasury, although he had expressed a little worry and had exonerated those officials, he had not dared to oppose it to his face. Now, Fan Xian had once again asked him to stay behind alone. Furthermore, he had said such honest words in front of him. Ma Jia knew that Fan Xian was preparing to raise him as a trusted aide. While he was secretly happy, he was also a little worried. After all, no one knew who would win in many years, between this young master in front of him and those elders in Jingdo. The court officials were also very sensitive to the ownership of the dragon chair. Although it looked like the crown prince would ascend the throne, the emperor's behavior these 2 years had been too strange, so no one dared to completely believe it. If it was the second prince ascending the throne, everyone knew that Commissioner Fan and the second prince did not have a good relationship. If he was determined to follow Commissioner Fan and the second prince inherited the throne, he would certainly not have a good end. This was what Ma Jia had been secretly worried about. However, he also knew that although one had to suck up to both sides in officialdom, when it came to important matters such as choosing sides, the biggest taboo was to be an opportunist. Today was the last day before Fan Xian left the palace treasury. Talking to him again was, of course, to make his attitude clear. Ma Jia had thought about it all night, so he was not very flustered. Calmly, he said, everything you have discussed is what I have requested. I will immediately write 2 documents on this matter. One will be sent to the Hall of Governmental Affairs. The other will be sent immediately on horseback to the Suzhou governor's manor. Please, do not worry. Hearing these words, Fan Xian knew that Ma Jia knew to tie his thigh. He was even willing to use these 2 documents to share the criticism that Fan Xian might receive. He also wanted to use this to show the people in officialdom where he stood. He had made up his mind. He glanced warmly at Ma Jia and said, "Sir Ma is considerate." Ma Jia smiled slightly and replied, "As the deputy of the palace treasury, I should be investigating the officials under me. For them to cause trouble this time, it is already my dereliction of duty." Fan Xian smiled. A moment later, he opened his mouth and said, "Does Sir Ma think that my handling of the matter today was appropriate?" Ma Jia thought for a moment and then respectfully replied, "Sir, you have thought far ahead. It is indeed a good plan. Officials are not like treasurers. They cannot be casually killed or casually punished. If the case was tried in the transport company's yamen, it would take too long. It would also easily attract criticism. Tomorrow, you will take these criminal officials to Suzhou and hand them over to the governor for interrogation. Governor Shui is a pillar of the country. He has a powerful official reputation and admires you. He will certainly be able to help the court investigate this case and give the emperor a good explanation." Fan Xian gave a silent praise in his heart. This deputy had indeed guessed his thoughts clearly. Fan Xian was going to find a way to get rid of Xinyang's trusted aides in the palace treasury. Although the strike this time had given him a good excuse, if he completely did it himself, it would not be appropriate. The matter involved the eldest princess, princes, and other nobles in the palace. Throwing this hot potato to that super-ranked official was a clever move. First, the Jiangnan road governor had jurisdiction over this matter. Second, although Shui Qing would secretly curse him, as a border official, his position was different. He was not afraid of the eldest princess far away in Jingdou. On the contrary, he would be wary of Fan Xian deep in the heart of Jiangnan. Weighing the two, Shui Qing should know very well what he should do. Before coming, Shaoan had mentioned to me that this cousin of mine has the talent to save the world. After getting to know each other these days, it seems that Shaoan was indeed not boasting. Fan Xian smiled and changed the topic. He once again began to use Ren Shaoan as a middleman to close the distance between the two of them. Ma Jia smiled and said, 2 years ago, when the commissioner entered the capital, you and Shaoan hit it off at first sight. When Shaoan sent letters, he often mentioned your shocking talent and that in the future, you will definitely be an official who can save the world." The deputy and principal chatted happily and gave each other high hats and flattery. They also agreed on the procedures for future trips to the palace treasury. Then, they raised their hands and bid farewell. Seeing him to the door of the garden, Fan Xian looked at Ma Jia's slightly bowed body and blinked his eyes. It looked like there were indeed a number of powerful figures in court. However, those people lacked many favors from his previous life, so they didn't have many opportunities to display them. After today's matter was settled, the palace treasury would have no major problems. He also felt relaxed. Furthermore, the work of stuffing trusted aides into the transport company would gradually begin in the middle of the year. With Ma Jia's help, this matter would go smoothly. At this moment, Fan Xian could not guess what it was that made Ma Jia choose him and not the legitimate prince. This was certainly not something that could be swayed by the close relationship between Taichung Temple's vice-official, Ren Shaoan. In reality, the reason for Ma Jia's defection was very simple. Because of the relationship between the third prince and Fan Xian, it made him make a large bet concerning his future career as an official and the rise and fall of his family. He bet all of his silver on the little one. After seeing off Deputy Ma and welcoming 7th shopkeeper, Fan Xian appeared particularly busy on the day before he was about to leave the palace treasury. 7th Yi was the leader of the 4 shopkeepers following Fan Xian to the south. Now, he was already a director of Qingyu Hall. These years, he had been helping the Fan Manor earn money. He was on good terms with Fan Xijia and was also very familiar with Fan Xian. Thus, there were some things that he didn't even dare to probe the other shopkeepers into, but Fan Xian was able to directly say them in front of him. The old man and the young man gathered together and whispered to each other. It was always about the future management and production of the palace treasury. Fan Xian knew that he was a layman in terms of production management, chemistry, and physics, so he delegated all of the authority in this area to Seventh Yi. He did not have many good qualities, but he did not doubt the people he used. It was like this in the palace treasury, and it had always been like this in Jingdo. As long as it involved an open conspiracy, it was all handled by Sir Yen Jr. of the Fourth Bureau. Fan Xian had absolute trust in the other party's professional abilities and would not idiotically point fingers. After confirming all of the matters, Fan Xian relaxed. In the past, the old Yi family had been so prosperous. Now, under the shopkeeper's hands, they would certainly be able to gradually reverse the poor management of the palace treasury and the problems with the quality and quantity of production. As long as they could sell more silver, they would have a preliminary account to the emperor. This was something Fan Xian was more concerned about. The matter of delaying wages can't happen again. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed. You should also pay more attention to the quality of the goods. Seventh Yi glanced at him. He was confused as to why the commissioner was always thinking about the matter of wages. Of course, he also didn't understand the reason. The spring light filled the garden. The old shopkeeper looked at Fan Xian's handsome face and, for some reason, wandered off. He faintly thought that although the young master and the young lady did not look alike, they were both the most elegant people in the world. Now that the young master had finally regained control of the Yi family business, although he was only managing it, the old shopkeeper still found it difficult to suppress his emotions. He sighed endlessly in his heart, but he hid it well on his face. The reason he had to hide it was because after nearly 20 years of house arrest in Jingdo, these old shopkeepers all knew that there were some things that could only be done and not said. If there was any sign, it would bring unnecessary trouble for the young master. I had wanted to ask you to go to Northern Qi to help the second prince. Fan Xian didn't notice Seventh Ye's thoughts and smiled bitterly. I didn't think that those eunuchs would keep following. The palace is very strict, so I could only have you come to the palace treasury. Seventh Yi smiled slightly and said, for your sake, the eunuchs are already very gentle to us. The second young master was born to be a merchant, so you don't have to worry. As for the palace treasury, you should know that I very much wanted to come back and take a look. Fan Xian fell silent. A moment later, he said, Su Wen Mao is here. If you feel any discomfort or if anyone dares to raise an eyebrow at you, tell him. I've already told him, since we've left the capital, we can't suffer any more grievances. Seventh Ye's heart was moved, but he didn't say anything. A gust of wind blew past. Before the tender green leaves on the green tree in the courtyard had fully grown, they were blown off. Fan Xian made a light sound and casually scooped them up in his hand. Looking at the new cut, he furrowed his brows for a long time. After a long time, he asked quietly and faintly, can the art be copied down? Seventh Ye's body trembled slightly. A moment later, he shook his head. It's a dead rule. It can't be written down. It can only be passed down by word of mouth. Fan Xian said, the blueprints can't be passed down by word of mouth. Seventh Yi shook his head. I watched it closely earlier. I don't even know where it is now. Fan Xian thought for a moment. A slight smile rose to his face. In a few months, come to Hangzhou and tell me about it. My memory is very good. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 356. The wheels of the four-wheeled carriage rolled over the grass that had just sprouted on the official road. When they collided with the cracks of the stones on the road, they made a creaking sound, which matched the sound of the reeds in the carriage, as if they were singing cheerfully. The road out of the palace treasury was filled with a joyous scene. Little birds flew quickly in the distant forest beside the paddy fields. The green rice seedlings revealed their slender and shy bodies. The weeds beside the paddy fields looked at them disdainfully. There was an endless stream of carriages on the road, and cargo ships came and went on the river. They transported the products of the palace treasury through various channels and sold them to the people of the world. It was a lively scene. A group of carriages, led by soldiers, easily passed through the innermost inspection line. Originally, the wagons on the official road did not dare to fight with this group of carriages and unconsciously stopped. However, someone in the group of carriages took a few glances and seemed to have found that there were too many goods coming out of the palace treasury today and the traffic was busy. He ordered his group of carriages to stop on a patch of grass by the side of the road and, surprisingly, let the wagons go first. In the second-to-last carriage of the group of carriages were the pitiful Palace Treasury Transport Company officials who had just had their black gauze removed and official robes taken off yesterday. These officials were all trusted aides the eldest princess had placed in the palace treasury. Although they had thought that their days would not be easy after Commissioner Fan took office, they had not thought that Fan Xian would not give the officials and his mother-in-law any face. He had very straightforwardly captured them. Furthermore, the reason he had used was the labor unrest. These officials now knew that they had fallen into Fan Xian's trap. Their hearts were filled with fear and unease. However, Fan Xian did not immediately open the court to try the case. These officials all had friends and knew last night in the prison that Fan Xian was prepared to bring them to Suzhou and hand them over to the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, to be personally interrogated. Hearing this news, the officials' moods improved slightly. As long as they didn't face the Overwatch Council's tiger stool and pepper water, how could this case be so easily settled? Even if the Overwatch Council had the confessions of the treasurer's betrayal, as long as they refused to admit it to the death after they arrived in Suzhou, Xueqing, Sir Xue, would have to give the eldest princess some face. As long as they dragged it out for a few more hours, once the pressure from Jingdo had arrived, Fan Xian would be too busy to take care of himself. Presumably, he would not pay any more attention to them. Why did Xueqing have to be interrogated? Haitang leaned against the window and furrowed her brows slightly. Fan Xian lowered his head and said, "I'm not suited to do this." Haitang made a soft sound of agreement and said nothing more. Ever since the day of the strike, the atmosphere between the two of them had become somewhat strange. The mutual trust they had in the past seemed to have weakened a little. They treated each other politely, but there was also a hint of unfamiliarity. After thinking about it, Haitang understood why. She knew that her proposal to travel had indeed put Fan Xian in a difficult position. But, seeing that Fan Xian was always so deliberately indifferent, she couldn't take the initiative to explain. After all, no matter what, Haitang was the saint girl of northern Qi. Her status was extraordinary, and Fan Xian's pride touched her pride. Thus, the two of them maintained this awkward exchange. "I want to confirm again. Have the silver arrived yet?" Fan Xian frowned. A faint smile rose to Haitang's face. It was as if she was mocking Fan Xian's worry about personal gains and losses. Quietly, she said, "I said it last time in Suzhou, why are you so worried? Perhaps you don't trust me now?" Fan Xian suddenly felt the atmosphere in the carriage was somewhat oppressive. In a low voice, he said a few words to Cece beside him and then lifted the curtain to disembark. Cece tilted her head slightly and looked curiously at Haitang. She didn't know how this famous girl had offended the young master. She had seen clearly these few days that although the young master and Haitang did not have any romantic feelings, at first their behavior was very much like that of a close friend of many years. These few days, he had been a bit strange. Haitang was puzzled by Cece's gaze. She suddenly smiled and said, "What are you looking at?" Cece said without good humor, "You're only allowed to look at me, not me looking at you." Haitang smiled and shook her head. Out of habit, she moved her hands to her waist and found that they were empty. These few days, she had been wearing the clothes of a serving girl and not the patterned jacket she was used to wearing. There were no two large pockets in front of her. She gazed at Cece and teased, "I'm looking at you because I want to see what the girl Fan Xian likes looks like." These words were the truth. Haitang had always been confused. Her good friend C. Lily was clearly the most beautiful girl in the world. Why was Fan Xian able to maintain his calm in front of C. Lily and purposely maintain his distance? Even after that wild night, he did not have any longing for C. Lily. They had been in Jiangnan for dozens of days, yet Fan Xian had not asked her a single question, such as how C. Lily was doing recently. No matter how heartless a person was, he would not be so cold toward a beautiful girl he had shared a night with and the blessing of being in the same carriage. Thus, Haitang even began to suspect that Fan Xian had some hidden illness, like the emperor. However, Fan Xian had taken Cece into his room. On this trip, Haitang knew that Cece, the serving girl, was someone in Fan Xian's room, so she felt it was strange. After looking at her these days, she still could not see what was so special about Cece. Her appearance was only dignified and delicate, far from C. Lily's soft charm and fullness. Hearing Haitang say, "The girl Fan Xian likes," Cece's face suddenly reddened. Using a voice as small as a mosquito, she replied, "How could the young master like me?" Haitang smiled bitterly and shook her head. "If he didn't like you, why would he take you into his room? Although Fan Xian is a cold-blooded and heartless person, I don't believe he would do something like this." Cece suddenly raised her face and revealed a proud and confident expression. "You are mistaken. The young master is the person who values relationships the most in the world." Relationships? Haitang savored these two words and remembered that Cece seemed to have served Fan Xian since he was a child. For a moment, she furrowed her brows and hesitated in her heart. Fan Xian was such a cold-blooded and heartless young official who took pleasure in scheming against others. Was he really a person who valued relationships? She sighed. Because there were no large pockets on her clothes, she could only regretfully roll up her two sleeves and ask, "Miss Cece, why were you staring at me earlier?" In reality, Cece had some conflicting feelings towards Haitang, who had been inseparable from the young master for the past few days. After all, she was not the young mistress and was an enemy of Northern Qi. But later, after interacting with her more, like many people who had interacted with Haitang, Cece also easily liked this girl who was gentle in speech, bright in conduct, and straightforward in temperament. Haitang was a person of noble status. Although her face appeared indifferent and she did not speak much, she treated people with sincerity. No matter what status someone had, she would treat them equally. Furthermore, it was a respect and equality that came from her bones, such as Cece, who was still a servant girl. Just this point alone made her surpass the rest of the world. Hearing Haitang's question, Cece couldn't help but cover her mouth and smile. "Just as you think, I also want to see what the young master looks like." The carriage quieted down. Haitang opened her large, bright eyes and looked at Cece like she was looking at a cute little animal. A moment later, she put her hands in her sleeves and shrugged. Do the Hu people not kill people? The Western Hu and the Northern barbarians had slaughtered countless Chinese people over the centuries. Their evil reputation had spread far and wide. Cece replied firmly, "Impossible." Haitang blinked slowly and smiled. "It's the same principle." A light breeze brushed past Fan Xian's face, telling him that it was spring. He closed his eyes and welcomed the breeze in his face. Smelling the scent of life in the wind, he was very pleased. The green leaves of the forest on the other side of the paddy field in front of him rustled in the wind. Suddenly, his eyelids moved slightly. He heard a rustling sound coming from behind him. It was not the wind rustling through the trees, not sweeping the street, not throwing dice, not writing with the tip of a pencil, and not eating the mulberry leaves in spring. It was her walking. The village girl was walking. Fan Xian didn't open his eyes. Slowly, he said, "Why is it impossible?" Haitang calmly walked to his side and used one word to express her question. Her lightness was very much like the blind man's question to Chen Pingping many years ago. The corner of Fan Xian's mouth twitched. "Why do you think it's impossible for me to like you? According to the council, the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi is already anxious about your marriage." Haitang put her hands in her sleeves and stood by his side. Looking at the cattle in the paddy field in front of them, she smiled slightly. She knew that her conversation with Cece in the carriage had been completely heard by him. She opened her mouth and said, "Looks like your Zhenqi has recovered well." Fan Xian opened his eyes and stared at a little bird that had landed on the back of a cattle. With a smile, he asked, "What I'm asking is, why it's impossible for me to like you?" Haitang turned her head to glance at him and found that he was asking this question very seriously. She couldn't help but reply helplessly, "I always like to be so flowery, but I can't really take advantage of you." Fan Xian was silent. He thought of the conversation he had with Seventh Yi yesterday. After his rebirth, there were many things he could only do and not say. However, with Haitang, it seemed that he could only say it and not do it. He couldn't help smiling and said, "I'm just curious as to why you're so sure." Haitang smiled slightly and said, "In Shangjing, you once said that all men, or perhaps male animals, think with the lower half of their bodies. I don't think I have that kind of appearance to attract your attention. After all, my identity is different. You have restraints, and you can't gain any benefits. How could you like me?" Haitang was the sage girl of Northern Qi, and Fan Xian was a powerful official of the Qing kingdom. The two of them could interact as friends. If they were to become a couple, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager and the Qing Emperor would certainly not allow such a thing to happen. On the contrary, it would bring harm to their plans. However, Fan Xian was not thinking of this. He mockingly said, "Liking such a thing has nothing to do with benefits. I've found that in just half a year, your temperament has changed a great deal from before." When they were in Hangzhou, Fan Xian seemed to have said these words to Haitang. Haitang was silent for a moment and then slowly said, "Tianyi Dao pays attention to the connection between heaven and man, the world above, and the people below. I had originally thought that these things could be done naturally. However, in this half a year, I've been entangled in many plans. It is very different from the way of our sect, so it is inevitable that I am not used to it." Fan Xian nodded slightly and said in agreement, "This kind of scheming is indeed only suitable for people like me. You should go back to being a village girl, a job with a future." He thought of something and sighed. "Speaking of which, your temperament is not harmonious. In the end, it is my problem. If I hadn't pulled you into the situation when we were in Shangjing, perhaps you would still be raising chickens and playing with donkeys in the garden." He turned to Haitang and smiled slightly. "Does this count as me leading you into the demonic path?" "What is the demonic path?" Haitang replied calmly. "It is only a demon in one's heart. With desires comes loss. Although my desires appear grand, they still have losses. This is the so-called way of nature." Fan Xian asked, "Then, you still persist?" "Of course," Haitang said quietly. "Anji, you once said something that resonates deeply with my heart." "What did you say?" "In this world, there has never been a good war or a bad peace." Haitang smiled slightly. "For this goal, I am willing to help you." Fan Xian once again sank into silence. He looked at the scene in front of him in a daze. He saw that the bird, perhaps on the mud-covered body of the ox, did not find any parasites to fill its stomach, so it flew away with a whoosh. "Actually, you don't have to feel too inferior. Fan Xian turned his head to look at Haitang. Very seriously, he said, I've always felt that you look very dignified. Haitang was speechless. A moment later, she replied, dare I ask, is this praise or mockery? Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. It is only in response to what you said earlier, the reason why I could not possibly like you. I am expressing my feelings. Haitang finally couldn't resist rolling her eyes at him like a little girl. It was very rare. Fan Xian felt an itch between his brows. He stretched out his finger and rubbed it. Don't compare yourself to me. Compared to me, there aren't many women in this world who are beautiful. He gloomily said, this is not my problem. This is my parents' problem. No matter how calm and composed Haitang was, she was still a teenage girl. Which girl didn't care about appearance? Unless she was blind. She was angered by Fan Xian's words, which were clearly comforting but secretly mocking. She thought to herself that his mouth was indeed a bit annoying. She gritted her teeth and said, as a high-ranking official, it's best if you don't make things up. Fan Xian didn't seem to notice her anger and explained seriously, I'm not making things up. You said I could not possibly like you because you are not beautiful enough. I want to explain to you that, in my opinion, your appearance is not bad. Haitang was slightly startled. Fan Xian's next words came very quickly. After all, there are precedents. The people of Jingdo all say that my wife is only delicate and pretty. In my opinion, Wan is the most beautiful woman in the world. He shook his head and sighed. My sense of beauty is probably not the same as most people in this world. These words finally poisoned Haitang. She gave a muffled grunt, took out her hands from her sleeves, and swept them away. With a sweep of her sleeves, the grass on the grass flew wildly. The wind moved without reason. It was forceful. Presumably, this sweep contained the supreme Zhenqi of Tianyi Dao. Fan Xian raised his hand to cover his eyes. He was very wretched in the grass. He swayed back and forth as if he could fall to the ground at any moment. Yet, his incomparably joyful laughter rang out from the grass that filled the air. The wind stopped and the grass fell. Haitang stood quietly to the side with a glimmer of mockery on her face. Looking at him, she said mockingly, after humiliating me, have you vented the anger from 2 days ago? Fan Xian sighed and smiled slightly. Duo, are you still breathing? This was the first time he had referred to her as Duo after the strike. After a moment of surprise, Haitang slowly turned and walked toward the carriage. The swordsman of the 6th Bureau in the carriage had long gotten off to stand guard. The Tiger Guards, with Gao De in the lead, watched Haitang cautiously. After all, Fan Xian's subordinates didn't know what had happened during the earlier gust of grass. They were afraid that Haitang would suddenly attack. Fan Xian followed and smiled slightly. Don't be in a hurry to get on the carriage. Walk with me. He waved his hand to have Gao De and the others retreat. After giving them a few more orders, he took Haitang and walked side by side along the woodland beside the road. The two of them walked side by side. There was already a long distance between them and the group of carriages. Sunlight shone through the spring forest above their heads. Strands of light intersected and transformed into all kinds of beautiful spots of light, shining on their clothes. I am a person who cares a lot about trust, Fan Xian said calmly. Perhaps it is because it is very difficult for me to find someone worthy of trust in this life, so I was a bit disappointed that you wanted to leave the manor that day. Haitang lowered her head slightly and didn't explain anything. Instead, she said straightforwardly, Duo is also a person who cares a lot about this matter. After all, you and I belong to 2 different countries. If there is no trust, it would be very difficult to accomplish anything. Once the words were out, it was relatively simple. However, asking Haitang if she wanted to go to the workshop to peep or if Fan Xian had misunderstood this girl was already a very unnecessary matter. Since the trust between the two of them had been restored to a certain extent through Fan Xian's sharp tongue, bringing up old matters again would seem very stupid. The two of them walked forward side by side. Haitang glanced at him out of the corner of her eye and furrowed her brows. Her hands were still in her sleeves. It was not as comfortable as Fan Xian putting them in his large pockets. Fan Xian quietly explained, "I had Cici add 2 pockets to the Overwatch Council uniform." Haitang smiled slightly and sighed with some regret. In the woodland beside the official road, a rustling sound rose again. This pair of man and woman, who did not have a personal relationship but were particularly demanding of each other's trust, were just like half a year ago in the royal palace in Shangjing in northern Qi. They naturally dragged their heels and walked lazily on the road beside the Yuchuan River. In front and behind them was a scene of spring. The leaves above their heads were tender and lovely. "How do you plan on dealing with the Ming family?" Haitang asked quietly. Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched slightly and said, "There are a total of 16 projects in the palace treasury's opening bid. In the past, the Chui and Ming families took up 14 projects. Now that the Chui family has fallen, there are about 6 spots left. I have already arranged for people to take them over. After Xia has pretty much gathered up the remnants of the Chui family's business in the north and the south will come together and the roads will open up again. As long as your commander of the guard doesn't mess around, there will be no problems with the goods the palace treasury sends to the north. As for how much of my own goods I can get, that will depend on how much control I have over the palace treasury." This was the agreement between him and the northern Qi emperor. Haitang had come south to keep an eye on this matter and that large sum of silver. Haitang was silent for a moment and then said, "Even if you can completely control the palace treasury in a short amount of time, if the amount you send to the north, according to the agreement, it will be more than what the eldest princess has sent in the past. How can you guarantee the amount you send to the Qing court? I'm worried that you won't be able to explain it to the Qing emperor. Before I came this time, the emperor asked me to bring you a message. Since it is impossible to satisfy the needs of the north this year, we can postpone it for 2 years until you have a stable footing. After all, this is a long-term plan." He hadn't thought that the northern Qi emperor would be so considerate of him. He couldn't resist smiling and saying, "We'll see how it goes. As long as the palace treasury's output this year is significantly higher than in previous years, it will be easy for me to explain it to the court." Haitang glanced at him and asked with confusion, "Where will this increase come from?" Fan Xian calmly replied, "First, of course, the output of the various workshops in the palace treasury has to increase. After the new source is created, there will be the old shopkeeper, Su Wan Mao, and the old Ministry of Revenue officials my father sent to tamper with the accounts. You also know that the one overseeing the palace treasury is me. It won't be too difficult for me to wipe away the traces. Second, I plan to take a big bite out of the Ming family and dig out this large family's wealth to offer with both hands to the emperor. The emperor will certainly be very happy." He returned to the question Haitang had asked at the very beginning. How exactly did he plan to deal with the Ming family? Hearing his tone, Haitang didn't seem to be prepared to wipe out the Ming family in a short amount of time. She was a little surprised and asked, "You can tolerate the Ming family?" "I have no choice, at least for this year," Fan Xian said with a self-mocking smile. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, "The Chui family's foundation is too shallow. Their battle lines are spread too far, so the Overwatch Council can succeed in one battle. However, the Ming family is a century-old family. Long before the palace treasury, they were a famous Jiangnan family. Their foundation is very solid. A large family of tens of thousands of people, who knows how many of them are officials in court. If we use thunderous methods to deal with them, I'm afraid Jiangnan Road will fall into chaos. The most important thing is, the eldest princess, crown prince, and second prince all have shares in it. Perhaps you won't believe it, but even the Fan family has a position in it. Furthermore, they send heavy gifts to Jingdo every year. The various ministries and even the Bureau of Military Affairs have a very good impression of the Ming family. They have always kept a low profile. You have also seen young Master Ming. He is a very steady person in the way he does things, and he does not have a bad reputation among the people. If we want to touch them, it will be very difficult. Haitang also began to feel that this matter was complicated. She found that although there was worry between Fan Xian's brows, he still did not lose his confidence. She asked, "What is your trump card?" "My trump card is the Emperor," Fan Xian said seriously. The Ming family stole silver from the palace treasury and gave a portion to the princess, princes, and officials. Everyone in the world likes the Ming family, but the Emperor doesn't like it. But the Emperor does not like it because the Ming family stole his silver. Not counting the words below, first of all, I sincerely request for monthly tickets, because old sixth position is very dangerous. 3,000 RMB. At this time, I have to take the night train to Guangzhou and arrive tomorrow. It's just that the journey will be long, and I have to pack up and make arrangements, so the updates for the next few days will be a little less messy. Please understand. Why do I have to go out? It's not that I have anything to do, it's just that I'm getting moldy from sitting at home. I need a change of environment and adjust my state of mind. Perhaps everyone doesn't understand the feeling of sitting alone at home from body to brain. Ever since I started writing the Qingyu year, my life has become rigid. Every day, I stay at home, sit, and occasionally go out, but I don't dare to drink. A life without the word presumptuous is very depressing. Lying on the bed, Wu Zhu and Fan Xian were still fighting in their heads. At 30 years of life, they finally understood the feeling of insomnia. Of course, I think this is a necessary professional attitude and occupational disease for writers. Other than a professional attitude, I need to adjust, so I decided to stay in Canton for a few days. It won't be too long, and it won't affect my writing. I just need to go out for a walk. The friend who wrote The Evil Ming is also in the same predicament, but he doesn't have time to drink with me. I also don't dare go to his place, so I can only go south. I hope everyone's body and spirit are not subhealthy, and smile more in life. In the end, I still firmly extended my hand to ask for a monthly ticket. Chapter 357. After hearing Fan Xian's analysis, Haitang felt slightly reassured. She thought that as long as he grasped this point, with the secret connivance of the Qing Emperor, as long as he made detailed plans and careful arrangements, then the fall of the Ming family was only a matter of time. No matter how powerful a local noble family was, in the face of the powerful machinery of the country, it was still a weak egg next to a rock. This year's goal is to eat up the Ming family's silver, Fan Xian said. The palace treasury bidding needs to be pressured by the Ming family. Furthermore, after winning the bid, it needs to reserve 40% of the base price. This spring opening, I will have people compete with the Ming family and raise the price so that the Ming family will have to pay a lot of blood. They will no longer have the ability to compete with me for the position the Cui family has vacated. At the same time, I will raise some quick silver and quickly fill it into the national treasury. How high are you going to raise it? Haitang asked seriously. Fan Xian smiled and said, as high as I can go. You know I am a very greedy person. Haitang furrowed her brows and said, since you don't plan on directly clashing with the Ming family, then you can only use the matter of opening the bidding to attack them. However, raising the price is not like shouting numbers into a dice box in a gambling den. If you raise the price too high and directly take it from the Ming family's hands. 16 items in the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury, 40% of the silver, calculate how much silver you will need. How will you get it? It is clear bidding, Fan Xian explained. In order to prevent officials and merchants from secretly colluding, the palace treasury has always used clear bidding for the spring opening. Coincidentally, this has given me an opportunity. Since everything is done in the open, naturally I will. He thought for a bit and did not continue to hide anything. In a quiet voice, he said, I will have Xia Qifei name a suitable price and then let the Ming family know. Xia Qifei? Haitang was slightly surprised. The head of the Jiangnan water bandits, a famous figure on the Jianghu. How could he listen to your arrangements to fight against the Ming family? You have to know that he was born and raised in Jiangnan. As for Xia Qifei's past, Fan Xian would not continue to explain. He only indicated that Xia Qifei was already one of his people. He then explained the problem of silver. Just as you said, the silver we have on hand is not enough to completely swallow up all 16 items of the palace treasury. Naturally, a portion of it has to be left for the Ming family. For one, it is to appease the other party. For another, it is to use that enormous sum of silver to trap the Ming family in Jiangnan and make it impossible for them to escape. Haitang asked curiously, how can you be sure the Ming family won't cut their losses? These past few years, they have already earned too much money. This time, anyone with a discerning eye knows that you have come to Jiangnan to deal with them. If you let Xia Qifei shout out a jaw-dropping high price, what if that old Ming master claps his hands and decides to stop playing? Wouldn't you suffer a loss in silence? Without a deposit, the Qing court will certainly not let Xia Qifei off easy. Fan Xian smiled coldly. Even if the Ming family vomits blood this year, they must still win the palace treasury bid. So what if their family has tens of thousands of acres of fertile land? In the end, they are just inanimate objects. How can they compare to the living water, fish, and grass of the palace treasury? Furthermore, this matter involves the interests of the members of the royal family in Jingdo. If the Ming family wants to send out silver and protect the eldest princess' face and interests, they must continue to stay in the palace treasury. He gazed at the slowly rising black smoke in the forest and narrowed his eyes. Merchants, in the end, are just puppets. The Ming family produces pirates to rob the treasures of the palace treasury and then turn around to take money from the court. They are vicious and merciless. Once they stop, those people in Jingdo will have no income. How could they let them go in their anger and humiliation? At that time, I won't even have to make a move. They will collapse. Thus, no matter what, the Ming family must control a large portion of the palace treasury goods this year. First, they will stabilize for a year or two. Then, they will see how the bloodless but particularly sinister struggle in Jingdo will develop. That sum of silver, are you going to transfer it to Xia Qifei? This was a question that Haitang was very concerned about. Fan Xian nodded. A portion. Although father has prepared some for me, once the palace treasury opens, everyone is watching me and the treasury of the Ministry of Revenue. The eldest princess has probably long guessed this source of income of mine. If I truly use the Ministry of Revenue's stored silver to fight this battle with the Ming family, I'm afraid if I'm not careful, I will lose everything. He self-mockingly said, using the silver of the national treasury is a crime that can get my entire family beheaded. I'm cowardly. Haitang heard him admit he was cowardly and shook her head noncommittally. In a quiet voice, she asked, but using Taiping Money House to transfer silver over, the background of Taiping Money House is Dongi. Aren't you afraid they will notice something? Fan Xian glanced at her and slowly said, this is the arrangement of your emperor. Perhaps even you would not have thought of it. A month after the Nyolan Street incident 2 years ago, the silver of the Northern Qi Palace treasury began to flow slowly and unobtrusively into the Taiping Money House through dozens of channels. No one knows how many twists and turns there were before the silver was moved to Jiangnan. Haitang was startled and speechless. Fan Xian continued, I had the help of the Overwatch Council and the Ministry of Revenue, but I still did not detect the direction of these dozens of sums of silver. Furthermore, although that sum of silver was large, it was not particularly eye-catching in Taiping Money House, the #1 bank in the world. I think Dongyi certainly did not notice it. Haitang shook her head in disbelief and said, Wait, you're saying, this sum of silver was moved 2 years ago by the emperor to Jiangnan? How is that possible? I only learned of this in September last year, and there has been no news of it in Shangjing. Correct. A glimmer of admiration and wariness flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. I only went to investigate again after you told me everything. In the end, I didn't find anything. I only faintly found that the time when those dozens of sums of silver entered Taiping Money House was 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Haitang furrowed her brows. You had only just entered Jingdo. How could the emperor guess that you would be in charge of the palace treasury in 2 years? How could he know that he would join hands with you and gobble up the palace treasury's marketing rights? Fan Xian said self-mockingly, at that time, I was just a nameless illegitimate child in Count Sinan's manor. He sighed faintly and said, perhaps it was the Nyolan Street incident that made your little emperor confirm that the eldest princess wanted to kill me. Furthermore, from various intelligence reports, he determined that I would be in charge of the Qing National Treasury. As for what happened afterward, perhaps it was just his analysis. Since there was no way for the eldest princess and I to work together, then I had to cut off the eldest princess's arm. The Cui family? The Ming family? No wonder at the end of last year, our two sides were able to deal with the Cui family so smoothly. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, but your emperor, how could he have guessed that I would use this move against the Ming family? If you want to say that he calculated to this point, I can only give him one sentence. Haitang had still not shaken off her shock. She had truly not thought that the young emperor with whom she had grown up and who often called her aunt disciple, would have such deep and far-sighted plans. As far back as 2 years ago, he had already begun to make arrangements to deal with Fan Xian or other possible variables. Hearing Fan Xian's words, she unconsciously asked, what sentence? It seems that your lord's wisdom is truly close to that of a demon, Fan Xian said gently. Fan Xian said in a gentle voice, he began planning 2 years ago. The development of the world has not deviated much from his guesses. Even if the emperor had decided to clean up the palace treasury and had not used me, the me that you northern Qi can fully trust. I'm afraid he still had a way to change the face of this silver and participate in the opening of the palace treasury bidding this time. It was not until now that Fan Xian somewhat gloomily admitted that he had indeed underestimated the young ruler in the north. Regarding the palace treasury, the most dazzling golden pheasant in the world, because the Qing kingdom guarded it very closely, no other country could do anything about it. They had tried to steal its craftsmanship for a dozen years without success. Who would have thought that the northern Qi emperor would be so unconventional and play such a trick? For the northern Qi emperor, since he couldn't steal your family's treasures as a thief and couldn't beat your family's guards as a bandit, then he would shake his body and become a nameless capital merchant. He would mingle in the process of your family's treasures. Although he wouldn't be able to get the first bite, he wouldn't just eat scraps. However, in this arrangement of the world, Fan Xian, a variable that surprised the northern Qi people, later appeared, so the northern Qi emperor became more and more generous and steady. Fan Xian sighed. In this world, there were many extremely intelligent and astute people. In comparison, he, an internationalist, carried too much of an idealist. Are you angry? Haitang looked at his expression and asked probingly. Fan Xian smiled slightly and shook his head. If your emperor had been hiding this matter from me, of course I would be angry. But now he must cooperate with me, so what is there for me to be angry about? Right now, It is as if he has used all of this money as a hostage and handed it into my hands. This is enough to exchange for my trust in him. Haitang sighed and said, "You are not a person who trusts others easily." Fan Xian lowered his head and slowly said, "Trust is mutual. I am just curious as to why your emperor trusts me so much. You have to know that in the future, if the two countries become hostile or if I have other thoughts, then I can eat his silver at any time and cut off his goods. He has no chance of turning the tables." He raised his head and looked into Haitang's eyes that were as bright as a clear lake. In a quiet voice, he said, "I have some misgivings about this sudden trust." Haitang was silent and thought for a moment. Suddenly, she smiled and said, "When I mentioned this sum of silver to you in the letter, it seems that is when the rumors of your past will appear in the world." Fan Xian looked at her with confusion. "What is the connection?" Haitang smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps in the emperor's view, since you are a descendant of the Yi family, then you will not be satisfied with being a powerful official of the Qing kingdom. Furthermore, your vision will not be limited to the borders of the country. Everything that the Qing kingdom can give you, the Qi kingdom can give you. The emperor probably has other intentions." She didn't finish her words, but Fan Xian already understood. He shook his head self-mockingly and said, "Thank you for your emperor's good intentions, but I don't want to frown and face thousands of fingers." Haitang smiled and said, "It's rare for me to be in the mood to write poetry." "I will not bow my head and be a willing ox," Fan Xian said lightly. Fan Xian lightly said, "Besides, your emperor should have known later that I was also a genuine Qing prince. There are many princes in this world, but of the descendants of the Yi family, there is only you," Haitang said lightly and gently, but she clearly understood Northern Qi's meaning. Fan Xian smiled and did not continue this topic. He was at the height of his glory in the Qing kingdom. Although there were a few women in the palace and 2 princes in Jingdo, which he had some difficulty dealing with, the emperor was playing the role of a loving father. He could not find a convincing reason to consider Northern Qi's invitation. "Let's go back to the beginning," Fan Xian said. "Why can't you like me? Why can't I like you?" Haitang was dumbfounded and angry. She wondered why this person was always entangled in this matter. In a cold voice, she said, Duo has never cared about the matters between men and women. In the realm of love, there is no difference between big and small, but there is a difference between up and down. I do not seek to destroy my feelings, but I will not consider this problem." Fan Xian understood that the girl was expressing the meaning of putting the people of the world first. With slight mockery, he said, "Worrying about the worries of the world first? Isn't it too boring to live like this? Your emperor still has a hat to play with." He didn't say what color the hat was. Suddenly, he smiled brightly and said, Duo. Haitang stopped her steps and tilted her head to look at him. She was dazzled by the gentle smile on Fan Xian's delicate face. She couldn't resist sighing and asked, "What is it?" "It is also possible that the Hu people don't kill," Fan Xian said seriously. Haitang knew he was talking about the words she had used to shut Cici's mouth in the carriage earlier. She couldn't help feeling bitter, but she still replied quietly, "Is that so? Perhaps neither the people of Northern Qi nor the Qing kingdom will believe it." Fan Xian said gently, "Of course, it is possible that the Hu people don't kill people if they have all been turned into dead people by us." Haitang was startled and laughed in spite of herself without rhyme or reason. Fan Xian said quietly, using the same logic, "It is also possible that I like you, and it is also possible that you like me." Haitang mockingly said, "Wait until we are all dead." "No," Fan Xian explained seriously. "Wait until everyone else in this world is dead." Haitang had no choice and said, "Everyone is dead, leaving just the 2 of us standing by the river enjoying the wind?" Fan Xian raised his head and thought for a while before nodding. "It does seem to be meaningless." Then, He took out both hands from his pockets and held Haitang's hands. Under the girl's slightly startled gaze, he gently rubbed them. He smiled warmly and said, "Since it is meaningless, then don't think about it. The weather is still cold, and you're wearing a servant girl's clothes. I'm afraid your hands will freeze." Their 4 hands clasped together. Firmness and gentleness melded in a patch of warmth. The rumbling of the carriage wheels came from behind the two of them. There was a glimmer of amusement in Haitang's eyes. She didn't pull her hands out. On the contrary, she tilted her head slightly and looked at Fan Xian. "Are you purposely letting others see?" Fan Xian half lowered his head and blinked his eyelashes slightly. In a quiet voice, he replied, "In order to convince my emperor that I brought you to Jiangnan for a reason, in order for the mutual trust between your emperor and me to have a firmer foundation, we must both be closer." Haitang looked at him with a not quite there smile. In the end, Fan Xian said seriously, "Of course, your hands are still very comfortable to hold. You often do farm work, but there are no calluses. Student Kitty has already arrived in Guangzhou, but everyone, don't worry. The updates will not stop these 2 days. At the same time, he also wants me to express sincere and strong thanks to everyone on his behalf. His monthly votes have soared overnight. He can be at ease, haha." By Jessiphy, to be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com, there are more chapters. Support the author and support genuine reading. Chapter 358. The interior of Suzhou was a scene of prosperity. Tender green colors could be seen everywhere. It was not much different from the rest of the Qing kingdom. However, the large number of shops, the busy docks, the endless stream of people, the large stretch of government offices in the south of the city, the oppressively wealthy salt merchant manors in the west of the city, the young masters on the streets of the east of the city, and the fierce, sinister, and cunning gangster brothers in the north of the city. All of this formed a scene that was different from any other place in the world. It was adventure, excitement, wealth, and desire. Here, there was much less of the concealment of scholarly knowledge. The pressure of the 1,000-year dynasty was much less. Although no one dared to challenge the authority of the government, because there were too many people moving about, the amount of goods coming in and out of the port was enormous. The citizens had money in their pockets and were able to do things with much more confidence. Putting aside the merchants who had deep connections with the government, just the brothers on the streets who made their living in the waterway also began to learn from the students of the Imperial Academy in Jingdo. They wore long green robes and no longer blindly fought and killed. The large stretch of land downstream of the Suzhou docks was all the Ming family's property. At this moment, the men in long robes were listening obediently to the lecture of a young master. It was clear at a glance that these long-robed men were skilled martial artists. However, in front of this gentle-looking young master, they did not show a glimmer of arrogance. This young master was the son of the old Ming master, Ming Lansher. These people hanging around on the docks all relied on the Ming family to make a living. They could be considered half-servants. After young Master Ming left, these men pulled at their long robes and wiped the sweat from their foreheads. They whispered among themselves, wondering why young Master Ming would specifically come to remind them to be more well-behaved in Suzhou. Given the power of the Ming family, did they need to be afraid of anyone pulling on their pigtails? The governor did have this ability, but had the old Ming master not fed him enough these few years? The long robes were convenient for wiping sweat. After all, these gangster brothers were not true Jingdo students. However, there were some clever people among them who faintly guessed that it had something to do with the palace treasury opening for the new year. Didn't you hear? The dignified Cui family, one of the two noble families along with the Ming family, had been scooped up by the court during the new year. Rumor had it that this matter was single-handedly handled by the young commissioner of the Overwatch Council. The commissioner was the imperial envoy currently in Jiangnan. No wonder young Master Ming was so cautious and feared the government would find some excuse. It was because he was afraid of Sir Fan Jr., who did not recognize his own kin and refused to budge. It's not that I'm afraid of him. Ming Launcher was sitting in the carriage. He could no longer maintain the calm he had in front of outsiders and his subordinates. With a serious expression, he said, Sir Fan Jr. is truly different from any other official in the court. If Fan of Fan saw who young Master Ming was talking to, he would certainly be shocked. Because the person sitting across the carriage was the host of the martial arts meet by Hangzhou's West Lake, the official from Jiangnan Road. At that time, when Fan Xian saw the official speak and act, he had secretly admired him. He probably would not have guessed that this official had such a deep connection to the Ming family. It was clear this official was someone the Ming family absolutely trusted. If Fan Xian had been more careful, he would certainly have been able to find out his relationship with the Ming family. At that time, if Fan Xian had been more careful, he would certainly have been able to find out his relationship with the Ming family. He would have been more wary of the so-called martial assembly. This official was Zhou Lei. He was the imperial censor of Jiangnan Road. He said with confusion, "Cousin, what is the difference between the imperial envoy and other officials in court?" Ming Launcher smiled coldly and said, Sir Fan is so young, yet he holds so much power in his hands. Can other officials compare? The Overwatch Council is not the same as your imperial censor. Now that he has the identity of an imperial envoy, there are no obstacles when he does things. Even the governor has to give him some face. You should have received the news. Once Sir Fan Jr. arrived at the palace treasury, he beheaded 5 troublemaking treasurers, including 2 masters of the workshops. Now, he has even removed all of the eldest Princess Transport Company officials. Which official in court has the confidence to use such ruthless methods? Zhou Lei sighed and shook his head. Without an insider, it will be much more difficult for the clan to play tricks in the future. Ming Launcher gazed at him and smiled mockingly. He said with disdain, I think you've become muddled from being an official. What season is this? You still want to play tricks? I just hope that the imperial envoy doesn't play tricks on us. In the tower upstairs by West Lake, Ming Launcher had been very respectful toward this court official in front of him. Yet, he did not give him any face at all. Yet, Zhou Lei seemed to be used to this kind of tone. Just from this scene, it could be seen how much power the Ming family was hiding in court. Zhou Lei's brows furrowed in worry. But the imperial envoy's trip to Jiangnan this time is clearly aimed at the clan. Does the old man have any plans? Ming Launcher smiled bitterly and shook his head. This is what I said earlier. Sir Fan is different from other officials. Normal methods will not work. If it was any other high-ranking official coming to Jiangnan, the Ming family has plenty of ways to deal with them. Yet, it has fallen on Sir Fan Jr. Our usual methods are completely useless. Zhou Lei probingly said, there are no officials in this world who are not greedy. Ming Launcher's eyes narrowed. It was as if he had thought of something that chilled his heart. After a moment of silence, he faintly said, this is the most common method, but it is usually the most effective method. Father saw things very accurately and knew that he had to use the mountain-splitting golden axe. We have also tried it before. He shook his head and sighed. In the end, the other party did not accept it at all and directly retreated. He also didn't say any harsh words. He was just like a block of ice. How much did he give? Zhou Lei did not believe that there were any officials in this world who were not greedy. Even if you were the emperor's illegitimate child, you still had to have silver. Ming Launcher raised 4 fingers. Zhou Lei asked with confusion, just 40,000 liang? A murderous intent appeared between Ming Launcher's brows. He lowered his voice and cursed, 40,000 liang? Didn't you see the 130,000 liang of silver in the chest in the young master's yamen? This time, father moved enough chips and even pushed down the tribute to the capital. He gathered a total of 400,000 liang, 400,000 liang. Zhou Lei's heart trembled. Even his lips began to tremble. Such a large sum of money could buy a small vassal kingdom. Could it not buy the imperial envoy's heart? Ming Launcher gritted his teeth and said, "There's also 20% of the shares." Zhou Lei almost couldn't believe his ears. This 20% of the shares was even more terrifying than 400,000 liang. How could the clan bear to use such a large sum of interest to buy Fan Xian? Usually, when he served the eldest princess, he had never been so generous. This could no longer even be called generous. It was completely cutting off his own flesh to keep him safe. Ming Launcher slowly closed his eyes. His eyelids moved slightly, and his face twisted slightly. Presumably, he was very unhappy in his heart. Zhou Lei didn't dare say anything more. The carriage sank into a period of silence. After a long time, Ming Launcher, who was now gradually managing most of the Ming family's businesses for his father, opened his eyes and slowly said, "We have all underestimated Sir Fan's appetite. Don't forget, his father is the Minister of Revenue in court. 400,000 liang can definitely buy a prince, but it cannot buy him. Thus, as I said earlier, this method will not work." "What about the eldest princess?" Zhou Lei asked with slight hatred. "The Ming family has done so much for her. She can't just watch and not do anything, can she?" Ming Launcher thought for a while and quietly said, "When dealing with officials, if you can't buy them, you will be slandering them. From the center to the limbs, you will have to work hard in Jingdo. In the court, you will have to scheme against the various officials. Unfortunately, this method doesn't seem to be effective." "Why?" Zhou Lei was shocked. Ming Launcher said self-mockingly, "What kind of person is Sir Fan? He has Director Chen and Minister Fan behind him. Although Prime Minister Lin has retired a long time ago, his power still remains. As long as the Emperor does not show any inclination, which official would dare to follow our wishes and submit a memorial against him? The Imperial Censorate has done it twice, but unfortunately, they were beaten cold-hearted by the Emperor's cane." Zhou Lei thought for a bit and then shook his head. "Today is different from the past. Sir Fan is far away in Jiangnan and has no time to defend himself. He is also far away from the Overwatch Council, so his reaction will certainly not be as fast as it was in the past. Even if his relationship with the Emperor is not normal, even if he is a proper prince, it is impossible for him to cause trouble in Jiangnan and not be summoned back to Jingdo. If we cause trouble, perhaps the Emperor will summon Sir Fan back." Ming Launcher mockingly said, "This is the weakness of you officials when you look at problems. You always keep your eyes on official rank and identity. Correct, even if a proper prince comes to Jiangnan, the Ming family has a way to send him back with his tail between his legs. Fan Xian is only the Emperor's illegitimate child, so it seems that we should not be afraid. However, the way the clan looks at problems is different from the way the officials look at problems. In our eyes, Sir Fan has power, soldiers, money, and a good reputation. Yet, he is also ruthless. Even if he has some stains, they have been completely wiped clean by the court's Overwatch Council, which is responsible for magnifying the stains. No one can catch him. Who can swallow such a smooth pebble? He is much more difficult to deal with than any royal highness. If we really incite the Jiangnan people to make trouble as you wish." Ming Launcher smiled coldly. "Do you believe that Fan Xian would dare to move the Black Knights into Suzhou and directly wipe out the Ming family?" Zhou Lei sucked in a cold breath and said hesitantly, "No way. Does he really not care about the face of the court at all? The Qing laws are not written for fun. He is a madman." Ming Launcher gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice. A seemingly cultured and refined madman. If you can avoid provoking him, then provoke him. Unless you have the confidence to make him disappear from this world. Zhou Lei suddenly quieted down. A moment later, he faintly said, "The Martial Assembly?" This was the Ming family's secret control of the Jiangnan martial arts world. They only wore the cloak of the court, so the Ming family did not control too many Jianghu aces. However, they had, after all, used Zhou Lei to control a group of fugitives. At this moment, he found that the Ming family could not do anything to the pebble-like imperial envoy. A vicious thought flashed through his heart, and he brought up this matter. Ming Launcher looked pitifully at Zhou Lei like he was looking at an idiot. Do you not know that Sir Fan himself is a 9th-level ace? Do you not know that the Emperor has sent a group of the most elite Tiger Guards to him? Do you not know that the 6th Bureau swordsmen who specialize in assassinations in the Overwatch Council and never leave his side? Do you not know that Northern Chi's Haitang once lived with him in Hangzhou for a period of time? Ming Launcher's voice grew louder and louder. He felt more and more that this normally shrewd brother official was truly an idiot today. He scolded, "Just that martial assembly?" Master Yun, whom father had invited from Dongyi, had only caught a glimpse of him by West Lake before he was stabbed by someone. Presently, those useless aces in Dongyi are being chased around like stray dogs by those strange people, that is Yun Jilan. Dongyi. The descendant of Sigu Jian doesn't even have a chance to attack in front of Fan Xian. Do you think these Jiangnan martial artists can kill him? Zhou Lei's face alternated between green and white. Only now did he realize that Fan Xian was not as simple as just a powerful official. In the present world, Fan Xian was definitely one of the wealthiest people. Those who were richer than him were not as powerful as him. Those who were more powerful than him were not as powerful as him. Those who were more powerful than him were not as shameless as him. Those who were more shameless than him were not as powerful as his backer. Those who were more powerful than him had not yet been born. He did not care for giving money. He did not worry if they wanted to reduce his power in the capital. He was not afraid if they wanted to assassinate him. He did not care if they wanted to ruin his reputation. He would only use a knife to cut off their heads to vent the anger in his heart. This was an abnormal existence created decades ago. He was an invisible prince, yet he had the Overwatch Council and Ministry of Revenue that a prince could not have. Even the eldest princess, who had secretly influenced the court for over a decade, could not find a way to deal with him. What could the Ming family do? Zhou Lei comforted Ming Launcher and said, "Sir Gua is also in Suzhou. Looking at his intentions, the eldest princess will help out in Jingdo. What you said earlier was reasonable, but Fan Xian is so arrogant right now. I'm afraid the crown prince and second prince will feel uncomfortable. Even if they cannot move him back to Jingdo, talking to the people in the palace will be able to suppress his arrogance." Ming Launcher nodded. He knew that he could only barely maintain the present situation. Hearing the word "Gua," he still couldn't stop the veins on his forehead bulging. In a cold voice, he said, "Tell your superior not to get involved." Back then, he hit Fan Xian with a stick in the Ministry of Justice Yamen and was chased to Jiangnan. Does he still want revenge? Don't forget, the imperial envoy is the most vengeful of young people. I just hope he doesn't get dragged down by that old white-faced Guozhang. The battle for monthly votes is truly cruel, the chase from behind is too close, so I still have to smile and extend my hand to ask for monthly votes. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.